Okay, thank you. I'd like to call to order the Planning and Transportation Commission regular meeting for August 10th of 2022. And first we'll have the roll call, please.
Commissioner Heckman,
Present.
Chair Lowing,
Present.
Commissioner Regdal,
Here.
Commissioner Ruperbar,
Present.
Vice Chair Suma,
Present.
Commissioner Templeton.
Here.
We have a quorum,
What about Commissioner Chang?
and Commissioner Ching is absent today.
Okay.
Right. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 commissioners in chambers, actually in the conference room near chambers. And we have 1 absent and 2 on Zoom. Okay, now we'd like to do the resolution relative.
Need the announcement.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Pursuant to AB 360.
Mike.
And then everyone else can turn off your microphone because it creates echo for the people who are listening.
Pursuant to AB 361, this meeting will be held with the option to attend by teleconference or in person. Members of the public may provide live public comment by submitting a speaker card prior to the start of public comment on that item. Speakers may address items that are not on the agenda during the oral communications portion of the meeting. Spoken comments via a computer or a smartphone will be accepted through the Zoom app. To address the commission, go to zoom.us/join. The meeting ID is 916-4155-9499. When you wish to speak, click on raise hand. To offer comments using a regular phone, call 1-669-900-6833 and enter meeting ID 916-4155-9499. When you wish to speak on an agenda item, hit *9 on your phone so we know that you wish to speak. Thank you.
Okay, also pursuant to law, at the beginning of each month, we have to re-vote as a commission to do exactly what was just described, to have oral communication. So packet page 5, we need a resolution authorizing use of teleconferencing for PTC commission meetings. Like a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Heckman and second by Vice Chair Suma. Any comment on that? Commissioner Templeton, is your light on? Okay,
No, sorry. Sir.
okay, then roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Heckman,
Yes.
Chair Lowing,
Yes.
Commissioner Regdal,
Yes.
Commissioner Ruperbar,
Yes.
Vice Chair Suma,
Yes.
Commissioner Templeton.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, excellent. It's now time in the meeting for oral communications. If there's any member of the public that would like to speak on an item that is not currently on tonight's agenda, please raise your hand. There are none in chambers, and Medina will monitor this.
We have 1 raised hand, and it is Rega Wood. Rega Wood, you have 3 minutes for your comments.
Hi. I am not familiar with this procedure. I wanted to speak about the ADU provisions as they affect us. I'm not
Yes.
sure if this is the right time.
No, as soon as this section is over, then we are going to, then we are going to move to that agenda item, so you can speak at that time.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just another note of procedures, particularly for our Zoom colleagues. We are in a conference room with a completely different video hookup. When you're not on screen, it is very hard to see a little postcard on the screen. So I may not see you to call on you and just kind of remind me if that occurs. Okay. So our action item tonight is a item that is from a continued hearing. And it has to do with a potential change to the
Chair,
ordinance.
do we need the director's report first, or did I miss that?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead if you have one.
Sure, and there are no, and by the way, there are no agenda changes, additions, and deletions. Just to let you know that we will be meeting on August 31st. Coming up, the Planning Commission will have 2 action items. One is an open space home to review, and then there is an ordinance for the conditional use permit thresholds. It's currently an interim ordinance. And then along with those, we do have a planned study session on retail best practices, although we have not received the report yet from our consultant, so that could be put off. I don't know. It's the plan though. So that's a full meeting. Hopefully we have a quorum on that date. Then just an overview. I don't know. Obviously, Rachel is no more serving as our assistant director, and we have not hired a replacement. So staff is, pinch hitting, myself included, for different roles that she was performing. I don't know if you often would talk about what's next on the council agenda. Obviously, the council is meeting tonight in the chambers, and that's why we're here for a carryover from last night or from, Monday night. The next council meeting, August 15th, does not have any planning action items on it that I can see, so I don't think there's any need for representation. And then we're on to a new month, September. I believe, well, I don't think there's anything on the 22nd, but I can check that. The September 12th would be the meeting that we do have some planning items, although those items have not been before the Planning and Transportation Commission. They are a couple of PHZ, planned home zoning pre-screenings. So that will be the council's first look at a couple of those addresses, 70 Encina and 4345 El Camino Real. And then, of course, the following week, the council will also see another pre-screening, a PHC at 3400 El Camino Real. So you see, it's working. There's housing projects coming forward, at least in pre-screening mode for consideration. Another one of interest is the Policy and Services Committee on September 13th. That's targeted for the rental survey program overview. So that's a first time, I believe, that we're doing something like that. And nothing else much to report. The department obviously is seeking staffing, and as our every other company all around, from what I understand. So that concludes my report.
Okay, thanks for pitch hitting. Yes, I was going to announce that Rachel has left us and you were standing in, so thanks. Is there a representation from transportation?
Yes, Rafael Rios is attending.
Hello, thank you. Rafael Rios, a senior engineer with the Office of Transportation. Just to give a brief update on what's going on around town. School is starting back up this week. Some grades started today, and I think everybody will be back starting tomorrow. So be aware of more kids and traffic on the roads. A quick update about our Charleston Raspadero project. It's still under construction. Most of the medians and striping have been put in place and it's ready to go. A few of the traffic signals had been pushed back, anticipated to be completed in November. These are for the intersections of Charleston at Lewis Road, Fabian, and Wilkie. And a little bit of good news is that we are going to try to get the intersection at Lewis, Montrose, and Charleston up and running sooner using some temporary equipment. We're targeting early September, hopefully by Labor Day, but can't quite promise it, but that's our target at this time. And with that, we are still trying to establish a date to have a study session regarding traffic safety and high incident locations in the city. A little bit of an update on that. We are working with our regional congestion management agency, VTA, is developing a local road safety plan specifically for Palo Alto, and that will help also identify locations. And so right now I discussed with our other staff, and we're kind of waiting for that report to come in, and that could kind of help us with our discussion that we have in the future. So.
Okay, any commissioner questions for either of the staffers that we've heard from? Commissioner Heckman?
Thank you. I first actually wanted to thank Ms. French for her vibrant reading of the opening announcements. That was the best version I've heard yet, and I'm interested to see if it actually spurs extra public comment tonight because you've made it so welcoming to do that. So I keep my fingers crossed that happened. I did have a question. Earlier in the year, one of the items that the commission dealt with was a lot split. It was the property that had the 4 cottages on it. And I think that may have gone to council earlier this month. And if so, I'd like to hear what happened.
Sure. I did attend that council hearing. Actually, I should say those council hearings because there was a continuation from the first hearing. This is Amarillo, and I want to say 1033, but I might be wrong. Okay. Sometimes numbers lodge themselves and sometimes they escape. So the council did approve that preliminary parcel map with exceptions, with findings and conditions that then moved into kind of protection of affordable housing. So there was quite a discussion, and this was just Monday night, so it's fresh. There was a discussion about somehow having a condition that would ensure that there was some continued units and affordability. So we'll see if that works, but that was the intent.
Vice Chair was there. Why don't you comment as well?
Yeah, thanks, Amy, that's right. And really what they were concerned was that they would get 3 units, a primary house, an ADU and JADU on each of the 2 new 10,000 approximately square foot properties. So they asked if that could be a condition applied for the final map. So there seemed to be a little bit of discussion about whether or not that was legal. And apparently it was decided it was legal. So in the end, that's what will happen unless something else comes up with the property. And yeah, I was there.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
I'll add something with regards to affordability. Of course, there is no way under SB 9 and under the city's additional laws, there's no way to ensure affordability of either ADUs or JADUs. I think that was the aim, but in the end, they had to give that up because there's no mechanism for that. It's just making sure there's 3 units on each with a shared driveway.
Okay. All right, well, then we will move on to our only action item, a continued hearing to review and discuss potential ordinance changes to Code 1809 on accessory and junior accessory dwelling units. It's a continuance, and so we'll have staff kind of pick up where we left off. We covered part of the agenda and made some motions on part of the agenda, so let's all catch up on where we are.
Definitely. So my name is Garrett Sauls. I'm a planner who's working on the ADU ordinance update. The items with which we discussed last week, on July 13th, were as follows. Basements, noise producing equipment, parking and allowances to have attachments with the ADU to those parking structures, privacy, corner lot incentives, and all of the policies in the staff report identified as policies E 1 through 8. The items with which we did not discuss, or the item that we did not discuss at that time, was the section of the staff report which discusses the affordable ADU incentive program. 2 of the items that the commission previously discussed were basements and noise producing equipment, which it sounded as though there wanted to be a little bit more discussion on that. But all of those items that I mentioned before did receive motions, and the motions were for the policies about basements to adopt all the bullet points that were recommended in the staff report, but to require all basements to count as floor area, not just when it's habitable or not. That proceeded on a 5-to-1 vote. The noise producing equipment policies were to adopt the staff's conceptual staff recommendation to reduce setbacks for junior and accessory dwelling units, but leave the primary dwelling unit regulations alone. That was a split at 3-3-1. The policies related to allowing an attached parking garage to an ADU without it counting towards the ADU's maximum size. PTC recommended to support staff's recommendation to remove that limitation. That was done, and to not allow a doorway between any attached garage and an ADU. That was put forward 6-0 vote with 1 absent. The other item was about privacy. That motion sought to adopt conceptual staff recommendations. That also was a 6-0-1 vote. The corner lot incentives similarly received a 6-0-1 vote as well. That was to adopt the staff's recommendations. And then it was further to there was further direction to staff to consider how that policy could potentially be abused in a manner where someone might be able to develop an ADU at a 10-foot setback with their house at a 10-foot setback, and then in the future come back and say they want to relocate that ADU. The PTC had recommended staff reevaluate, take another look at that and understand how that may or may not be able to be controlled. And then the last item were the policies 1-8 that's identified as section E in the staff report. All of those received a 6-0-1 vote. So again, the remaining items to be discussed, the PTC wants to bring them up again, is basements and noise producing equipment, as well as the item which we did not discuss, which was the affordable ADU incentive program. So I can share my screen and walk through the policies that we were including in the staff report on the affordable incentive program.
Okay, one other thing I want to add beforehand that we discussed in the pre-meeting is that originally in the last meeting, the plan was to have staff come back with some changes to be discussed, but instead you've chosen to get other changes for tonight, and then we'll have a third meeting to consider this whole thing with all the changes.
That's correct. Yeah. So if the PTC decides that, for example, the affordable ADU policy is not something that we want to create, instead use those incentives and put them towards making it available to all units to utilize those incentives, not just ones that are deed restricted to be affordable, staff would modify that draft ordinance and return back in the third hearing, primarily just to have PTC review the final, I say final draft, but final version of the draft to identify any further modifications or to move it along to city council.
Right. Okay. So just before you put up your slides to get going here, we definitely did not, we definitely parking lotted the affordable ADU discussion. And we're going to start that from scratch, although we have talked about it in the past. So that's there. But the other two, I'd like to get some input on from the commission that we actually have already discussed and wrestled with, and then made a vote as to whether or not we would bring that up again, which would be a little bit, off procedure, but that's okay. We can have that discussion as well. So I think I'd rather have that second point first, where we discuss if we want to rediscuss something that we already discussed and voted on, because then we'll know exactly where we're going. So I just like to open up for discussion, and I'll do my best of seeing the screens up there for Commissioner Rupavar and Templeton. Opinions on whether we should revisit those. Commissioner Heckman.
Thank you, Chair. So unfortunately, the verbatim minutes for that meeting, which was July 13th, aren't out yet. And I didn't independently make notes about why we would want to revisit the noise and basement issues. I'm not opposed to it, but I just, and in fact, part of the notes I made after the meet at the end of the meeting were specifically that we were going to do it. So I think by the end of the meeting, you had at least outlined what you wanted to accomplish tonight and included both of those items. So I'm not sure why we want to talk about it more, but I'm open to it. I did want to mention on the basements, and again, this will be something we can see when the minutes come out. I think that one was approved 5-0. Commissioner Chang was absent and Commissioner Rekdal had to leave the room briefly. And I think he was out during the tail end of that conversation and the vote. So I guess that would be an abstention rather than a 5-1-1. I don't think you, Commissioner, were opposed, but that
Yeah.
maybe you registered your vote later and I just didn't remember it.
I did not register my vote.
Okay, all right. So I think that accurately, that was a 5-0-2 vote.
The dilemma we had was, if you look at that drawing on packet page, what is that, 16, is not so much whether we allow the first one, but whether we allow the middle one. And that 5, you said it was 501, was that, or 502, I guess it'd be. Was that the middle one? Did I include the middle one or is that just the first one?
So in my notes, it was all 4 bullets, except which are on the top half of that same page, except the word habitable, I think, was deleted from the 4th bullet.
Okay.
I thought.
Did you have a comment?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, Vice Chair Summer?
So unfortunately, I didn't watch the whole meeting, and as Commissioner Heckman noted, the minutes aren't available, but I did watch the end, and you made the motion, and it quite clearly, and I took notes on the motion that night, quite clearly, we did say noise and basements and then affordable ADUs, so why don't we go ahead and do that, and, and were you thinking that
That's fine.
Commissioner Chang was not at that meeting?
I'm sorry, I was misremembering that you were the one that was absent rather than Commissioner Chang.
No, we were both there.
Well, so
I
who,
was absent.
okay, I knew somebody was absent.
Somebody,
Somebody
yeah.
was absent. I didn't remember who.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
But like I said, I've got no problem at all going through these items again, and my notes indicate that that was our plan. Yeah.
Okay, good. So that's the plan. So then we probably should start with those, those 2 before we go to the affordable. Is that all right with everybody?
Yeah, what about our public speaker?
Oh, yeah, sorry. This is a continued hearing. Just a second. Sorry, this is a continued hearing, so we generally don't have public comment. We do have a letter from Miss Wood that I was going to have our staff comment on in lieu of public comment. So Garrett, would you, I have the letter in front of me, but would you please comment on her concerns and where we are on that? And I know you've been in dialogue with her.
Yeah, so I've been in email correspondence with Ms. Wood, and I think initially there were some misunderstandings about some aspects of the policies that we're putting forward, which I communicated to her were, I think, different than the understanding she had initially taken to it. I wasn't available last week. I was out of the office, so I wasn't able to get some subsequent responses to her before this meeting. But I do intend to reach out to her regarding the letter that she submitted on August 5th, which is the one that you have next to you, which you're referencing. I haven't been able to fully evaluate and review those items that she's indicating within that letter to the extent that I'd be able to more fully detail out any sort of responses to. But I do
I'm raising my
intend
hand.
to.
Oh, sorry, I can wait till you're done.
I do intend to reach out to you, Ms. Wood, and apologize that I haven't gotten a chance yet. I'm still just catching up on some things.
So yeah, this will come back again before it's an ordinance. So we would have time to take a look at it.
Chair?
Yes, I was just gonna say, I was just
Thank
gonna
you.
call on you. It's very hard to see up on that screen. Sorry.
I know. So I hope it's
I don't mind at all when you do that and say chair, because then I know you're ready to talk. Go ahead.
exactly. I'm trying to make it work for everybody, so I appreciate your patience. So
Just a procedural question. Earlier, Ms. Wood did try to make a comment and she was deferred until we had this action item in front of us. But if she wasn't going to be allowed to speak to this action item, shouldn't she be allowed to have spoken at the general comments? It's confusing. I just want to make sure she's still on the line, it appears, and I want to make sure if she
I
has the
think
right to
the-
speak that we get to hear from her.
I think the technical answer to that is no, but I can allow comment and I'd be happy to do that. I'd be happy to allow Ms. Wood to comment. So we're going to set that up.
So our first speaker is Rega Wood. Hi, Rega. If you could
you.
unmute yourself and you have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you for permitting me to speak. I'm opposed to regulations that make ADUs more difficult to establish. Our particular situation involves an ADU we wish to build for our son, who's a substitute teacher in East Palo Alto. We had planned an ADU with a flat roof that was going to be within the only at the 4-foot setback position. So what that means is a lot. We planned an ADU with 2 very small bedrooms, basically a bedroom and a study, or a second bedroom, a small kitchen, a very small bathroom, and a very small living area. That brought it to 895 feet. At that point, you're subject to the daylight plane regulations. That meant that the roof could only be 12 foot tall. Of those 12 foot, 4 foot 8 inches has to be taken up with piers, or so that the finished floor has to be 4 foot 8 inches above the ground level. That leaves you with very little space. And if you then assume an average width roof, say 10 inches, then you're left with a floor to ceiling height that is less than 7 feet. And that is not allowed by the Palo Alto Building Code. So we're put in a position where it is impossible to proceed. And I was hoping that some way of making it possible to go forward could be found. That's all I had to say, and thanks for listening.
Thank you. I don't see any raised hands from 2 other participants.
Okay. Thanks very much. And as was stated, Ms. Wood, staff is going to get back to you about these things, and I'm sure there's some resolution here. Okay, so then let's go to the staff report, and I think we should start in the order, either basements or noise, whatever.
Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen again.
Okay, so we're starting again on packet page 16. For anyone. who
Yes, and
wants to follow
thankfully,
along.
last packet and this packet is numbered the same for a change. Excellent.
Okay, so the first 2 items are about basements and noise reducing equipment. Basements, those regulations in particular discuss how the city would be able to regulate for table 2 units the square footage that might be counted towards floor area, as to some extent being able to capture that space in terms of the total maximum allowable floor area that these units can be developed to. Other aspects that the staff had raised in the staff report were related to whether or not the city wanted to, and the planning commission wanted to recommend to council the any specific language regarding requiring basements to be fully below grade rather than allowing them to be partially sunken. There were some privacy issues that staff had highlighted in the staff report that the center image of what you're looking at on page 16 here, thank you, could create the opportunity for a 2-story unit, which again raises some issues of privacy towards adjacent neighbors. The other policies identified in the staff report would be to provide that allow for light wells to be no closer than 4 feet to a property line, and also provide some protection measures for existing trees that might be either protected species under the new tree technical manual, a new tree ordinance, or at least provide for protection in the event that those root zones may be significantly affected, that they could potentially fail. As it relates to noise producing equipment location standards, that policy in particular was to provide for some additional measures on street side yards for any time that there are noise producing equipment produced or placed in that area, to basically require that they be screened from view either through landscaping or some other means in order for them to be integrated well into the site and the overall design. And then additionally to suggest further relaxing the noise producing equipment standards specifically for ADU and JDU units. The reason being that many of the unit staff is seeing, HVAC units that staff are seeing tend to conform already with the city's noise producing ordinance. Generally in R1 zone districts, the maximum decibel rating at a property line is 66 decibels. Many of the units that we've seen are either around 60 decibels or less. So that's why staff is suggesting that it could be for ADUs and junior ADUs specifically only. Those units could be potentially even closer to a property line and still be compliant by their design with the city's noise ordinance. The other policies related to noise producing equipment for the primary home would remain the same. And then further distinguishing any sort of unit that might be tried to be shared within or between an ADU and a primary home would need to follow the more stringent requirements, being the primary home setbacks rather than the junior or the ADU setbacks. And then
Okay, so let's take those two before we go to
okay,
the affordable, because this is sort of a rerun here. So, okay, might as well do it in that order. Commissioner Rector, you started on that. You want to tee it up?
Yeah, I've been thinking about the basement issue is the whole purpose here is we want to encourage ADUs. And so I would think that we should do our best to make the basement work. And Commissioner Heckman did point out that it's very unlikely that a full basement would be built. It'd be just quite expensive. So if we do have basements and ADUs, I suspect it will be 4 or 5 feet deep, something like that. That raises though that you have a floor that's 5 feet off the ground. Now anyone standing in there is looking out. So my inclination would be to say, yes, you can have any basement you want, but if any finished floor is above, let's say 5 feet, it can only have opaque windows facing property lines. And that would allow people to have ADUs, but also prevent you from looking over into the neighbor's fence, which is only 4 feet away.
I just wasn't quite clear on what you described. We need a whiteboard in here if we're going to be changing buildings here.
Okay, so you could have any basement you want, whether it be fully depressed or partially depressed. But if a finished floor is more than 5 feet off the ground, then the windows on that level cannot have transparent windows. They must have, any windows must be opaque that face, any window that faces a property line would not be able to have transparent windows.
You're talking about a first floor or a second floor?
Any finished floor that is 5 feet off the elevation, 5 feet off the ground.
Again,
So that would be most likely a second story, right? If you had a basement, but they were like the public commenter was saying, well, her floor was 4.5 feet off the ground. If for whatever reason you had a finished floor that was on pillars that was 5 feet off the ground, you shouldn't be able to look over into your neighbor's yard at that point. So I think the cleanest way to say it is any floor that's 5 feet off the ground, the windows on that level that face a property line cannot be transparent.
Commissioner Templeton?
Thank you. Yeah, I was just wondering if we have requirements like that for any other kind of structures. I'm seeing second stories go up that clearly can see into the person's backyard, the neighbor's backyard, and I've heard of no such restriction. Just wondering why we'd want to do it for this kind of structure when it doesn't apply to any other probably more egregious situations.
Garrett? Good to have staff comment on that.
The reason I would bring this up is that you only have a 4-foot setback. So maybe you say if the setback is less than 6 feet and the finished floor is more than 5 feet off the ground, then you cannot have transparent windows facing the property line.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner. I was just wondering if that makes sense, because if you're a little bit further back and twice as high, you can still see the same, if not better, into your neighbor's yard. So yeah, I would definitely love to hear from staff. Thank you.
Certainly. So Commissioner Templeton, to your question, currently staff require obscured glazing on windows on the second floor level as a part of the IR, the individual review program for a new 2-story home. Typically, we will require them for windows that do not have at least a 5-foot sill height from the second floor level. Otherwise, if windows are at that second floor, that 5-foot sill height, we do not require them to have obscured glazing. But for any windows that, like I said, don't satisfy that requirement, we do require them to utilize that. To Commissioner Rechthal's point, I think one of the things that we had raised in previous staff report were concerns about identifying where privacy becomes an issue or not as it relates to setbacks from properties, only because that can to some extent infer privacy beyond that point is no more of an issue, right? Contrarily to it, right? And so that also is gives some concern to staff for specifically the IR program, where privacy typically, if you think of a traditional interior lot, you have either a 6 or an 8-foot side setback or a 20-foot rear yard setback. Along the rear, we traditionally only use landscaping as a means to screen that, as it's certainly much further away as a part of kind of an intent to be more commonsensical, to not require usually master bedrooms are along those kind of rear facing areas, not kind of block out those spaces, right, for the occupants. Along the interior side, we will require obscured glazing, between that 6 and 8 foot distance, but that's only because people traditionally build to those setbacks, right? So if they were further away, I think we would still require obscured glazing, even if it was, say, 8 to 10 feet, and landscaping between those spaces, because those are the areas where there's more visibility that I think people are a lot more concerned about.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's exactly the scenario I was thinking about on my street. One of the neighbors, backyard adjacent neighbors built a second story, and it is, very tall, and it's a full, double French door. And so the windows are straight visible into the property behind it. Also, there's cables that go through along the property line, and so the vegetation isn't an option. So it's interesting that that some of these privacy situations wouldn't be as applicable, but it's also interesting to hear. I mean, it wouldn't be universally applicable, and it's interesting to hear that there's some potential negative side effects of having it defined so specifically in one scenario, which would imply that it wouldn't be applicable to another scenario. Are there any safety concerns as well about, is it just window screening, or you wouldn't have windows? I was trying to clarify what the suggestion from Commissioner Rectal was. But I would think that we might want to have some, alternate mode of exit available. So I would think sometimes you may need to have a window there. I'd love to hear comments on that from staff as well. Thank you.
Go ahead.
So the policies that were previously recommended by PTC to move forward with were to require all egress windows to face towards the front property line. There still can be interior side and rear facing windows, but those would be the 5-foot sill height windows, which I had just described before, which would need obscured glazing. So to some extent, I don't think they would serve the same purpose as an egress window, right? In that you can't easily or more easily escape out of them in the event of a life safety event.
Okay.
But to Commissioner Rectal's point, I think if there is an interest in doing something along those lines, the more objective we can make that approach, the easier it is for staff to implement. Whereas right now for the IR program, the individual review program, that is to some extent a conversation with the applicant in where staff go back and forth to say, we think you need more privacy measures. We have ones that we traditionally work. So to some extent, they've become objective, and that has been somewhat distilled into the staff report and into the draft ordinance. But if there are other policies that, like you were suggesting, you wanted to put a certain height limit to where any window which faces this area at this level needs to utilize some obscure glazing, if there could be an objective standard, I think that's much more easier to implement rather than having to have that conversation on these permits, because they are supposed to be ministerial. So there's not supposed to be discretion applied to many of these projects.
Commissioner Rupavar?
Thank you. I guess my question relates to this and then more overarchingly to for City Attorney Yang. So I've canvassed ADU regulations and statutes probably across 35, 40 jurisdictions in California. And I haven't seen things like glazing, et cetera. I guess my concern is, and I know that the statute says like you can't be imposing anything onerous. I don't think like glazing necessarily is onerous, but I'm seeing a lot of more detailed restrictions in our ordinance than I've seen in like, literally I've looked at 40 other ordinances. Do we have any concerns generally, or should we be keeping in mind like maybe feedback that we might get from ACD and rejection of our ordinance, or like any issues with state law? Because state law is pretty, the whole purpose of the state law was to make sure that there's a proliferation of ADUs and that, cities aren't adding additional restrictions. I just kind of want to get your take on that overarchingly as I think through these issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly the possibility that, we could layer on so many requirements that it could have a chilling effect on ADU production. I don't know that we've seen that in practice. I know that we continue to see, a lot of ADUs come in for permits and be approved. So, I think it's a good point to keep in mind that, we are able to, regulate based on our concerns for certain classes of ADUs. I mean, there are other ADUs for which we just have to approve them, even if they have, windows on a second story that look right onto the neighbor's lot. If they fall within certain parameters of size and height and setbacks, we would just have to approve them. It's not something that we've seen as an issue so far, but it's something that we would certainly monitor.
Okay. And so the glazing, like what we're talking about here, would only apply to ADUs over 800 square feet, right? So anything under, you couldn't do any of these additional.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's a little bit more complicated which ADUs it would apply to, but if you have a detached ADU that's under 800 square feet, these regulations aren't going to apply.
Okay. Okay, that's really helpful. Yeah, I don't have anything against like glazing. I just kind of want to flag, like, let's just the overarching concern that, making sure we don't run into issues with like state law or HCD if we get too restrictive. Thank you.
Vice Chair Suma?
Yeah, I had a question regarding Commissioner Rekdal's comments and concerns. So we can't really do that for 18, the ministerial section. So we're talking about 1809-040, which is the ones, yeah. So I'm wondering if that is already covered, really honestly, under, what is it, 1809-040, page 46 at the bottom, little I privacy. Second story doors and decks shall not face second door. Oh, and then second story windows, excluding those required for egress. Wouldn't that count for second stories that were above basements also? Or do we need to clarify somehow in this section?
Right now, we don't allow basements for these table 2 units. So within the section that you're referencing, we don't currently provide an allowance for basements. Presumably in the example we have in the staff report of the center image of the sunken basement space, that was the issue that staff was trying to raise, to say this can create that, or create more, or sorry, provide more of an opportunity to create that situation, that conflict in privacy. And so as a result of that, we want to be making sure to communicate to the PTC and the public who are listening, of course, to, what measures can we implement to protect privacy concerns.
Okay, then I agree with Commissioner Rekdal that these same privacy A, B, and C issues should apply to, if approved, should apply to units with basements. I think that makes sense.
Commissioner Heckman?
Yeah, thank you. So our existing ordinance, before we're even talking about the revisions, actually addresses a lot of Commissioner Rekdal's concerns. Vice Chair Suma had pointed us to packet page 46 onto 47, but that's the existing part of the ordinance. And B is really the operative provision that most directly addresses what Commissioner Rekdal is talking about. But if you go to packet page 34 and 35, I think that's more instructive, because that's the same ordinance, but with staff's recommended changes, if I'm reading that correctly. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And so for example, if you look at the very bottom of page 34, the existing language was second story windows, but staff has recommended a change to windows on a second floor loft or equivalent space, right? Which I think gets at partially at Commissioner Rekdal's point of it's not necessary, depending upon the site situation, it's not necessarily going to be a second floor. And I had actually, in the notes, in the edits I had emailed before the last meeting, suggested we put in the word elevated. And that's one of the things we'll see when staff comes back with a marked up version, whether they like that or not. But I think all of these things get at the point that the Commissioner Rekdal was trying to make, that as the unit goes up and it's in close proximity to the property line, that we want to make extra, we want to have those extra protections. And so my point is, we already have a lot of that, and staff is proposing in the language to fine tune it even further.
Does staff agree with that?
That's correct. Absent, making a more direct relationship to like a, specific height, right? Of like when these things apply, which I think, as Commissioner Heckman was saying, the equivalency of these spaces is, I think, what we are trying to target with this draft language in front of us. We may, when we were preparing this, I think we were thinking more along the lines of, that floor level as it's created, the loft, space is when we're really going to start to say, this is, comparable to a second floor where we want really to protect against privacy issues versus saying, is there an equivalency space in the way that we think of it as counting twice towards floor area for the normal regulations we have for the primary home. That would be something that if the commission feels strongly about having some more direct language there, we can certainly do that.
Can I continue, Chair?
Yes, certainly.
All right. So now I'd like to look more broadly the way Commissioner Rectal started, because he's really talking about these three images that we're looking at on packet page 16, and really the focus is on the middle unit, because I think all the commissioners, according to my notes, were supportive of the two diagrams on the ends. The discussion was focused on whether this middle version is a good idea. And so I wanted to follow up on that a little bit. The last diagram, 2 levels above grade. And I'm looking at the clear space on the second floor, and it looks like 6'9", right? So I guess the first question I had is there anything in our code that would prevent a closed door bedroom with a 6'9" ceiling? Is that allowed?
To my understanding, I'd have to check about that specific, narrowly directed question.
Mm-hmm.
As it relates to whether it's like a floor level or habitable space. My understanding is that the building code requires 7.5 feet at a minimum to become a habitable space, in which case this would be more like a loft, right?
Okay. All right. Because I do think that's important. And we did talk about this a little bit at our last meeting. I mean, my belief is if we're creating housing, we want to create livable housing. And whether it's a loft with a roof line at 16 feet or a bedroom with a roof line at 16 feet, I mean, we want to be creating places where people can sleep and where they're comfortable. I've got a son in Brooklyn right now who is sleeping in his bedroom overnight, and in the morning he gets up and he goes over to his desk in the same room and he works remotely all day. And we want those opportunities, particularly with ADUs. And so I think we want to encourage livable spaces and that function well for residents of our community. And so I think if to give somebody a more livable space, we need to allow them to excavate a little bit to get a more reasonable height inside that allows us 7'5" ceiling, as long as they're not going over the max, which I think is 16 feet. I'm supportive of that.
So you're saying you want to make the third graph look more like the second graph?
What I'm saying is I would support the second, all three of these options should be available to members of our community who want to build an ADU.
Okay, got it. But you're not saying that the third one should be ruled out because it's only 6'9"?
No, if somebody wants to build that, if that's what they want on the second floor, a loft, that's their business. But if they want to enclose it and they come up and they say, I want a closed door bedroom here, then I want staff to be able to direct them. Well, the issue you have if you start at ground level is you only got 6'9" clear space. And that only allows a loft because you need 7.5. If you want to have a closed door bedroom up there, what you're going to need to do is excavate down X number of feet to give yourself 7.5 feet of clear space.
Yeah, I was just trying to get clarity on that, because we could say that number 3 is out because these ADUs are going up for 50 years. And we want to make sure that anybody can live there as opposed to people who want lofts. I was just asking a point of clarification. You got another question down here? Vice Chair Suma?
I was wondering if Mr. Sauls could tell us what our motion, our like straw poll and direction motion vote was.
Yeah, so the motion previously was to adopt all the bullet points, the 4 bullet points you see on packet page 16. And then also to modify the last bullet point to say that regardless of whether the space is considered to be habitable, if it's a subterranean construction, that counts towards the floor area for the unit. So in the example that you see on packet page 16, if you can imagine that first example and the second example, something in between where it's not a full floor level, but a low grade, that would still count towards floor area towards the site rather than being exempted. And that was the motion which went for 5 to 1 to 1, 5 to 0 to 2, whichever.
Okay, thank you.
Two commissioners online, now the sun is setting over your head as well, so it's even harder to see. Feel free to speak up. Okay, other comments from commissioners on where we are? I'd like to take it back to you, Commissioner Recto, because you raised it and then heard some comments. Is it in the ballpark for you?
Yeah, that's in the ballpark. I think it's a lot cleaner from a legislative standpoint to say you can have a basement, as opposed to saying it has to be fully, it has to be a 7-foot basement. It can be any basement that the builder wants, provided that the roof is under 16 feet. I think that's good practice.
Okay, and originally I was just raising it as a clarification for debate, but I'll raise it again as a question for myself, which is considering what Commissioner Heckman said, there are still going to be ADUs that go up at 6'9". And the question is, from a policy standpoint, would we want to recommend that not happen because we want to have habitable space for the long term?
I'll jump in and I'll say, I mean, a lot of people in cities, a lot of housing has a loft that is usable. You can crawl up there and sleep, but it's, it wouldn't be the way everybody wanted. But I think it's fine. I mean, it's kind of a standard practice. It doesn't bother me. I think I'll restate something I recall that I said in the last meeting, and that is that I'm not a big fan of basements for environmental reasons. And I'm not a fan of more excavation and basements and on a site, but I don't think it's fair to not allow them for ADUs when we allow them for the primary. And I did want to ask a question. I don't recall if I asked this, but it's in my notes. Bullet 3, a new basement must not negatively impact tree roots on adjacent lots. I'm concerned that it says adjacent lots, but not on its own lot. Is that an unnecessary concern?
Presumably it could be both. I think the idea in general really was to provide protection, in particular for adjacent lots that might not have the ability or authority within the permit application to do anything, right? Where the property owner obviously is managing their own boundaries, everything occurring on their lot. For adjacent lots that might not realize until work starts what's going on, if there's an issue where a tree root basically gets cut in half, that thing is more susceptible to failing, which means collapsing, falling, harming someone or property, right?
Okay, so does it need to be added here or is it just understood that will be part of the application process by the primary lot owner? That the trees on the applicant's lot are also protected, or is that covered? I think it is, but I'm just checking.
If I remember correctly, I'm trying to find it in the
Yeah.
packet now,
And
but I
thank you,
believe that was,
Commissioner Heckman, for directing me. I was looking at the wrong version, but I knew it was in there. Thank you.
yeah. So there is, all of this is more regulated by the Urban Forestry Department, right? And so they obviously have much more authority in how things are, or knowledge really in how well a tree will be able to survive impacts like that. But On
So-
packet page 34, if you look at section J, which is setbacks, it'd be J2, it'd be J2 capital C. It would say the new basement in the draft ordinance, it'd say the new basement shall not negatively impact tree roots on the subject property or an adjacent lot such that it will require the tree to be removed or fail.
Okay, thank you. Then that's covered.
So question to staff, based on our conversation here, is there any changes for you to be made? And if so, do you know the direction or?
I understand the direction. I'll have to take another second to look at it to see if there's a need to change anything. I don't believe that there is. I think there was more so just a question raised in the staff report to, those three diagrams. Do we want to include additional language to regulate whether basements can be, sunken fully below grade or whatnot? But I'll take a look at it now, just a second.
I mean, because if there's any changes, happy to put it to a new vote.
No, there's no need to change anything in the draft ordinance that's in front of you, based on the direction that everyone's talked about.
Right, and we're
today.
all going to see it again.
Yeah.
When it comes to the ordinance. Right, any other comments then on basements generally? Okay,
I think Commissioner Templeton wanted to say something. I saw. I think she was muted, but I'm not sure. Maybe she was not talking to us.
No, there is some off-screen activity in my house, so no, that's not for you. Got to get the rambunctious children to quiet down during PTC time. Thank you, though.
okay, thanks, Commissioner Heckman.
Yeah, so the way we're ending this issue without any further motion, I just want to make sure I understand. Our current ordinance scheme will allow an ADU in either of these three diagram type designs shown on packet page 16. And staff was bringing this item to us in case we wanted to limit it, in which case we would need to add language to our ordinance. Do I have that right?
That's correct. Where basically you have A, B, C, D. It would be A, B, C, D, potentially E, or some additional language from the draft ordinance within those four.
Okay. Thank you. So then I'm comfortable with the ordinance in its current form, which allows submerged, partially submerged, or unsubmerged. Thanks.
That sounds dangerous. We better work on that wording for sure. Okay, let's move to noise then.
So the noise ordinance section was a bit more straightforward. Like I mentioned before, that those policies in particular were discussing reducing further the location standards we have in place today for, noise producing equipment, specifically for junior and accessory dwelling units. The current standards are that all noise producing equipment associated with those units have to follow a 4-foot setback to the property line. And what staff's proposal, based on the PTC's prior direction, was to allow for effectively a 0 to 4-foot setback, depending on whatever intent a property owner would want to pursue. The separate item to that was to just provide some kind of screening measures for street side setbacks, or for units placed on a street but side setback, that they would be screened utilizing some sort of vegetation, so that on another street facing side, you don't just see a bunch of mechanical equipment in front of the house. And that direction, as I mentioned before, the motion that had been made did not carry forward. It was a 3 to 1 vote.
Who wants to kick that off with any new insights? Commissioner Reckdahl?
Yeah, I can start. I voted for it just because I think it does allow more efficient use of the parcel. And if we can do that, that's always a good thing. I had a couple of concerns. One of them is fire. If we have something in that setback that impedes the fire, could that make it harder to fight fires or respond to emergencies? Have we cleared this with the fire department?
So all these structures, given their proximity to property lines, need to be fire rated. which means that they're either, I'd say multi-minute, but hour rated, right, is usually the typical term that we experience when people are building structures close to a property line.
Mhm.
And what that means effectively is that, within, an hour's time, if there's a fire that's ignited, that structure is not just going to light up like a match, right? And just poof.
Yeah.
Presumably, there could be an impediment if with having anything within that space. Although I would say that there are many instances with units that are at or almost adjacent to a property line. So if the issue is whether or not something is accessible between that space, we may not have, there may be an argument to say, it may be equivalent almost in those scenarios that the fire department will usually find a way to be able to solve the issue. Even when there's a structure closer to a property line, regardless of if it's spaced and there's a mechanical unit there. With the mechanical unit, it's a little bit easier to maneuver around than an entire wall, sistered next to a fence, right?
Mhm.
So,
I mean, these split units are pretty small. Could we have like a 2-foot setback for the HVAC equipment?
we could have a 2-foot setback.
And that would allow people to use that setback so it doesn't clutter up their yard, but still that would give access to emergency responders.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, that would make me feel better instead of allowing the whole setback to be used by the HVAC, that you would have only a 2-foot setback. But the second issue is that, well, suppose this thing is really loud, that you're 2 foot closer to the property line. And so I went back to my freshman physics books and dug out the acoustics and did the equations. And for that first 5 feet, there really is a big roll off. 2 feet actually makes a big difference. When you start getting out 30, 40 feet, that's more of a plane wave and you don't have to roll off nearly as much. The number of
Wait,
dBs.
could you translate that, please?
The number of dBs that you lose per foot is quite high when you're close to the device, because it's 1 over radius squared. And so as you go out, that radius gets larger, and therefore the roll off isn't nearly as much. So for that near field, when you're close to that device, 2 feet really matters. So, but if that device is quiet enough, then we don't care. And so let's say it was a 65 dB device. The neighbor is not going to hear that. If it's an 85 dB device, the neighbor will hear it. And so it isn't just the location, it's also how much noise it makes. So if we put some type of reasonable limit on that device that's in that 4-foot setback, I think the neighbors are protected. And as you mentioned, the modern split units are quite quiet. It'd be quite easy for a homeowner to get under a 65 dB limit. But we also are precluding them from having a very noisy unit when there are quieter units on the market. So.
That is correct.
Medina, we've lost the screen entirely now.
Oh, sorry.
Oops. Yeah, let's do another way.
So Chair, the screen is flicked on and off a few times. My
Yeah.
impression is that we're still live.
We are live.
Yeah,
we
it's just
are
that we
absolutely-
can't see out from the
Well, we
screen.
can still see you guys.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure the 2 remote commissioners could participate.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll speak up. I think, Carrie, you can say, but we'll speak up if we want to say something, if that's helpful. That way you don't have to mess with the screen.
Yeah, that's great.
Same.
Okay, Commissioner Heckman?
So I'm looking at the language of the ordinance, which, as Mr. Sauls, I think, pointed out, it's at the bottom of packet page 33. So these units, they have to be insulated, they have to be housed, and they have to meet our noise standards at the property line. And so I think that covers us, whether the unit is 2 feet from the property line or 4 feet from the property line. I do think, and maybe this is an inquiry we should have, since this whole item is, the whole ordinance is coming back to us. Maybe between now and our next meeting where we cover this, we could get some clarity on noise attenuation over space, because I think I mentioned at the last meeting that, yeah, I've in my work, I've been involved with a number of noise studies, and the general understanding I've always had is that you get 3 decibels of attenuation over 50 feet, and below 3 decibels, the human ear can't even hear it. So at 25 feet, you couldn't even tell the difference. But what Commissioner Rectal has found is something different than that, that suggests that actually in close proximity, there may be a difference. And so I'd be interested in the city chasing that down for our next meeting, so we have better factual basis to make these decisions. Because I do think that could be relevant. I guess when I think about the fire issue, which obviously is important, but when I think about a lot of these, so I think if we have an ADU that is 4 feet from the property line, which it's allowed to be, I was kind of thinking in my head about water heaters and air conditioning units insulated in a housing, and how those could be, and sometimes are, wider than 2 feet. And so if we require a 2-foot setback, then are we unintentionally excluding the ability to have the equipment on that side because you can't fit it in the 2 feet next to the ADU, which is at 4 feet. So on that particular issue, I'd really like to just let our fire folks tell us if they have a concern that we should be thinking about with equipment on the property line side of a ADU 4 feet from the property line.
Vice Chair Suma?
Yeah, so currently we don't allow noise producing equipment in the side setback, which is 6 feet.
4 feet.
Oh, it's 4 feet?
Well,
For ADUs, for ADUs
No,
and
I'm talking
JDUs.
about just for a
For
regular.
a primary home, it can't be in the front yard, rear yard, or side setbacks. Typically, that's 20 feet front, rear,
Right.
6 or 8 feet on the sides.
So I don't understand. I still have concerns, and maybe if we get some of this data that my colleagues have requested when we're looking at the final version of the draft, but I still have concerns that we're just reducing that we're increasing the potential for noise traveling into other people's yard. And I think I asked at the last meeting, that there could be such equipment on 3 sides of your house if 3 people had ADUs. So I'm still not convinced that this is a good idea and that it's not a reduction of our noise policies.
I think the suggestions are very good to just kind of hold on this and get some real data from both the fire department and the respective engineer that can give us that data. And I think that will inform council, which is even more important. So I'd be comfortable with that.
I will say we don't have a noise engineer on staff, so it'll be a lot of internet research, which is not a problem. It's obviously not entirely inaccurate, but
I'm happy to give you my equations and you can verify whether I made any mistakes.
All right, we'll see how this works.
Do we need a special calculator for that?
It's
HP 84 or something? TI?
Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
just tying this back to a conversation we had earlier this evening, do we think that restrictions like what we're talking about now would slow down or prohibit development of ADUs?
Was the question if we had this restriction, would it slow down ADU production?
Yes.
I would say it has not seemed to slow down ADU production from what we've been able to tell.
Okay.
This would just provide some additional flexibility to site planning for the unit.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have a general consensus that we can hold on this until we get that information? Okay, great. We can move on to the third one unless folks want to take a short break. This is our only agenda item. No? Okay. Let's press on to the affordable ADUs.
So the three items that are included in the ordinance, based on PTC's previous discussions about creating an incentive program for affordable junior and accessory dwelling units, was to allow for a reconstruction or expansion of non-conforming walls. What that means is for existing non-conforming spaces, those would be portions of a structure like a garage or a pool house that right now may be developed closer than a 4-foot setback. One of the incentives was to allow for those areas which would not currently be able to be expanded in that envelope without shifting it outside of the 4-foot setback for an ADU. It would be to potentially allow that expansion to increase in width by about 6 inches and increase in height. The initial proposal was up to 1 foot. With the direction based on some of the conversation that occurred during that previous meeting, there was some hesitation about further reducing very confined spaces between fences, property lines, and these units where you may have, which is very common actually, an existing accessory structure adjacent to or abutting to a property line or a fence, where if you don't currently have a lot of space, you now have to coordinate with your neighbor to, access your property via their property to do maintenance on that wall. And so staff had taken that direction and incorporated into the draft ordinance to identify that for areas where you do not have at least a 1 foot separation between a property line or a fence and the structure, that you would not be able to benefit from this incentive provision. So you would need at least a 1.5 feet from your interior or rear property lines in order to benefit from that expansion. The other policy was to allow for, like I said before, a 1 foot height increase, which what staff's take on that policy was to allow for structures to increase either up to a maximum of 1 feet or up to a maximum of 12 feet if the existing non-conforming structure is already overly tall based on its location. What that means is if the structure today is 11.5 feet tall, there effectively would be a cap of 12 feet that structure could be expanded to. So rather than a foot increase in height, they would only be allowed a 6-inch increase in height to be able to achieve that. Additionally, staff included in the draft ordinance a requirement that the roof line be maintained, the existing style of roof line, either a shed, gable roof line, would be maintained such that even though the structure is expanding from a massing and visual standpoint, it would to some extent not be changing so dramatically in terms of what residents might be experiencing. It might certainly be slightly larger, but the overall impact is still about the same. The second policy was about removing the existing requirement for a garage replacement. What that is and what from the replacement or the not needing to the policy, which does not require replacement parking for a garage being converted to an ADU, that structure needs to exist in the first place. And so what this incentive would be to do, what this incentive would do is for anyone who's proposing to build a brand new home, they can have one of two choices. They can build a brand new home and build a garage and build an ADU, or they can build a new home and they can build an ADU. So to some extent, in that instance, you would not have covered parking anymore if someone went down that route with this specific incentive. And every kind of iteration in between would be approvable, right? That the idea is that much like some of the commissioners have mentioned tonight, we're trying to find ways to encourage ADU development. And so one of the barriers to that is the need to have an existing garage in order to convert that to no longer have to provide a covered parking space on site, which counts towards the floor area totals for the property. And those kind of development standards can have a push-pull factor as to natural incentives for a homeowner to either engage in this process or not engage in this process. The last item that the PTC had discussed was providing for an exemption of all fees, for impact fees, for plan review fees, for units that fall underneath this category. So impact fees are only applicable to units that are, 750 square feet or greater. If you're 749 square feet or lower, you do not pay impact fees. You still have to pay plan review fees. Impact fees have gone up substantially as a result of the parks fee increasing substantially more recently in the last 2 years. Whereas now the per unit, if you can think of a one-to-one relationship in size for an ADU and a primary home, say you have an 800 or 1,000 square foot home and you're building an ADU that is the exact same size, you would have to pay about $67,000 in impact fees. Building permit fees will vary between $4,000 and $10,000, but it also, that's just kind of an estimate, as it's also dependent on the valuation of the work that's being done. So that fee could even be more. So just for those two fees, which are not including school impact fees, of course, can be substantial for a project that may, from what we've been what's been communicated to us from the local architect group who's been working on these policies, you know, that could be a $67,000 to almost $80,000 add-on to your $200,000 to $300,000 loan that you're taking out to build your ADU. So that can become a more significant incentive, provided that that is the correct relationship, the actual example we're dealing with. The way impact fees are assessed is it's proportional to the size of the home. So if you have 1,000 square foot ADU and a 2,000 square foot home, you're only paying a 50% of that $67,000 that I mentioned before. And so, you know, as you kind of tinker with those numbers, those percentages will fluctuate. So you may pay less or more if you build a unit that's over 750 square feet, depending on how large your home is, your existing home is, or proposed home is. And then the last item that you see on the screen about other dimensions of affordable ADU policy, this is to resurface the discussion that occurred previously as to the time length for how long, if this program is something that the PTC wants to suggest to council to create. Then last time there was a non-decision effectively made as a part of a motion to say that the PTC couldn't make up their mind as to what duration and length of affordability they would want to make these units if that was a program that they wanted to do. So the entire discussion last time also couched this discussion on presenting this item to the PTC as these specific incentives incorporated for a program for ADUs and junior ADUs, presented it to the PTC as an incentive program, to which the PTC could also take a vote to say that they do not want to proceed with this program and instead vote to incorporate these policies into the standard allowances for every type of unit, non-deed restricted, non-affordable, just, you know, incorporate them into chapter or section 1809040 as a kind of a by right allowance.
That's it? Okay. Yeah, it seems to me procedurally we should go through these first three on their own without respect to whether it would apply to BMR or everything, unless people have an objective that say number 2 shouldn't be applied to everything. Because again, in the spirit of trying to do as much as we can, it seems like that's a simpler way to do it. But if there's any comments on that, okay. Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Ekman.
I guess I had some more overall comments before we delved out into the weeds on these 3 specific items.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think we should put questions now to to staff. I have a couple as well. So go ahead.
Well, I didn't have questions as much as overall comments. So why don't you?
That's fine.
Okay, so my overall concept here is, first of all, ADUs by their nature are a more affordable housing type, but they're not, the use of the word affordable there is not the same as we're talking about in this incentive program. We're talking about definitionally affordable within our housing affordability brackets. So it's you know, where we're trying to fit like the 60 to 80% EMI, those sorts of things. So we want to encourage ADUs because they are naturally more affordable than other housing types. And in this program, we're looking at, do we want to create a special subset of deed restricted, even more affordable ADUs? And I think we should try it, but I don't think that, I don't think we're going to get much action there. And so what I want to avoid as we go through this is taking things off the table for a regular ADU that might actually make somebody build one and reserving that for an affordable ADU, which nobody does build. So my overview here is like items 1 and 2, I like those for all ADUs. And I think when it comes down to an affordable ADU, it's a property owner's decision to deed restrict his ADU is either going to be altruistic, as Vice Chair Suma has talked about from time to time, which can and I think does happen, or it's going to be basically numbers driven. And the question will be, can we, with item 3, exemption from fees, give them enough of a financial incentive and a short enough duration of the deed restriction that they say, you know what, I can do that. And so that's my kind of overview of how we balance our desire to get more ADUs overall with an opportunity for people to do a deed restricted, more deeply affordable ADU.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically the kind of direction that I was seeing here, was that on the first 3, we wouldn't have to decide if it's for just BMR ADUs. It should be discussed in general if we want to do that or not before we get to the 4th one, which was really difficult last time. And I would agree with you. I predict that it would be really hard this time. I just had a couple quick questions. On number 1, as I understand it, if there's an existing garage, actually like mine, on the lot line, it was that way when I moved in. But if I want to make that an ADU, then I have to move it a foot.
If you were looking at trying to utilize the first incentive, the only areas you would be able to benefit is the only area you'd be able to utilize this more likely than not would be the height increase. You would most likely not be able to do any sort of width increase, because if you're going to move the structure, the city would say you have to now move it to the 4-foot setback. You can't just peel away certain portions of it to say, oh, well, this one's fine now. And also separately, it would seem counterintuitive, right, to start peeling away some portions of the structure that might be closer than
a better example is there was somebody that I know from an old athletic team, and they asked my question. They asked a question about it because they had one exactly the same way, and they said that in the current plan we couldn't build an ADU using that wall that's on the lot line, and that was restrictive, and so therefore they decided not to put up an ADU. So that's a kind of a good example of, is that what we really want? Or if it's been there for 50 years, why do we care that it's still on the lot line? And maybe you're saying we don't, because they could still, if we adopt 1 here, does that mean that this person can keep the unit, the garage that they're converting on that lot line?
That's correct.
Okay.
What they would be able to do is pop it up a little bit more potentially, but the width would probably stay where it is.
Okay, that was a question because I just wasn't quite getting it.
And that is one thing in particular that I think in the task force's letter that they had indicated was, as a result of this policy in particular, something that could help some of those old carriage house
Yeah,
garages,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Build up a little bit higher so that the insulation can be accommodated better.
Okay, and then on the second one, I know we went over this a couple of times, but it basically means that in your last statement, you said people could put up a home and an ADU and no garage, which would mean there'd be no covered parking for either of the two units, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
But they still would have offsite parking required or off road.
No. I mean,
You can have uncovered.
presumably, yes. Would they be what the city considers to be required spaces? No. Can you park in your driveway anytime? Yes. Does the city consider that to be satisfying the required parking spaces? No. So in that example specifically, if someone comes in, builds a new home with a detached garage, with a detached ADU or an attached ADU, they would not need any covered parking at all on the site. And to that extent, they would not need any offsite parking at all. There would no longer be a requirement for them to show parking on the property.
What is the requirement for single family house right now for parking?
The current requirement is at least one covered space and one uncovered space, both of which need to be beyond the front yard setback and outside of the street side setback, if that's applicable.
Okay. So can I keep on going?
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean,
Questions?
This makes a lot of sense to me to allow the garage to turn into an ADU. I don't understand why that you still don't have a uncovered parking spot requirement.
The previous direction from the PTC was to, separate from that, when you, based on current state law, if you are converting a garage to an ADU, you do not need to replace parking on the site at all. Uncovered, covered, nothing. And that stands for table 1 and table 2 units. So that's just a policy that applies to all.
So we have no
garage
say in that.
conversions.
Whenever we allow garage conversion, we not only not have to replace that covered parking, you can now delete your uncovered parking requirement.
That's correct. The difference is that currently it's a 2-step process. You have to build a garage and then you have to convert it to no longer have parking, quote unquote, on the site, right?
Yeah, which makes no sense. Okay.
Other questions before we? Okay, then let's jump in on number 1. Vice Chair Suma?
Sure. So the 6 inches wider is to make bring a wall up to a current building standards, right?
Right. Insulation, basically space, right, to expand the envelope just slightly to make it more habitable.
So that is not problematic to me at all. The 1 foot taller is to accommodate the same sort of current building standards.
Same approach, yes.
Yeah. So that's not problematic to me. And that would not apply in a situation where the ADU wall is less than 1.5 feet from the property line, basically.
They could be 1 feet, 1 inch and benefit from it. It would just be, they only get an inch, right? The policy basically is to say, if you have a foot, or you have more than a foot between your interior rear side property line, wherever that comes about, you can expand that slightly. If you do not have that, you cannot benefit from that policy. You would basically still, for the sidewall, need to maintain that existing envelope or non-conforming condition.
Taking them one by one, so that's all on.
Yeah,
this
I think
one.
that's good. Anybody else on one? Commissioner Heckman?
Yeah, just to remind me, so we talked earlier tonight about ADUs can be up to 16 feet. Here, we're talking about basically a limit of 12 feet on a conversion to an ADU. And so which seems like it might conflict with the 16 feet, but I think what we're talking about is the ministerial type ADU versus this discretionary type where because, for example, this garage is right up against the setback or close to it, within closer than 4 feet, we don't have to let them convert. If we're going to allow them, then we can impose additional sort of balancing constraints. Is that our theory on having less than 16 feet here?
It's more focused than that. It's actually only for areas between 0 and 4 foot setbacks. Because once you go beyond a 4 foot setback, you can expand that structure to 16 feet. So where right now those what are considered to be non-conforming conditions, we think of it like a shrink wrap, right? It holds everything in place. You can demolish and reconstruct to that shrink wrap idea. That's what state law and the city code allows for, but you cannot push that shrink wrap out, where this policy would allow for those 0 to 4 foot setback areas to push.
That's very helpful. Thanks.
So to your overarching question, it would not conflict with state law because state law says you can demo and rebuild to the same dimensions of what is out there today. It does not currently provide a provision to expand non-conforming spaces.
Any other comments? Commissioner Rectal?
Yeah, that was my exact question. So if you had an old garage there with a certain size, it was non-conforming, you could knock it down, replace it, put it in the exact same footprint, and you have a new building on that new spot, on the existing spot.
That's correct.
Okay, and the 12 feet limit for the height, is that just for the area that's within the 4 feet?
Correct.
And so if it ramped up and went higher, there'd be no constraint on that?
Once it goes past 4 feet, no.
Okay. And there's no constraint on if it goes higher and goes to 20 feet. If it's an existing structure that goes to 20 feet, you could rebuild that at the exact same envelope.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay.
That would be another form of non-conforming condition, right?
Okay. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Should we go on or would it be more helpful to vote on each one of these? It's easy enough to do. Want to vote one at a time?
Wondering if maybe, I mean, I've kind of given my overview, but other people haven't, and maybe that's going to affect how you vote on something. So maybe this kind of discussion we've just had about one is good. Then we do 2 and 3, and then come back and vote.
Either way.
That gives everybody a broader perspective.
Okay, item 2 is what we were just talking about, converting and not requiring any parking. So remove the existing garage carport requirement for conversions. Comments? Commissioner Rupavar?
I just had a question. So, and for staff, so this is basically like a process issue. So instead of having to build and, is that what you were saying? Instead of having to build and then demolish the garage, you can just build the ADU directly?
Correct. The main benefit and difference is that the state and previously the city even provided a allowance to not have to replace that required parking on the site. Previously, previously, I mean, prior to 2020, the city allowed for you to convert your garage to an ADU and replace those spaces as uncovered spaces. Those would now become the required parking spaces as uncovered instead of having a new covered structure which counts as floor area, lot coverage, which may or may not be doable based on however the lot is currently developed.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
It's still unclear to me why, if the home is going up without an ADU, it requires one covered space,
2 spaces, 1 covered on 1 uncovered.
a new home even.
Correct.
Right. So if they put up the same new home with a external ADU, not a junior, then they don't have any covered space requirement.
With this policy, if it were adopted, yes, that is the intention here. Otherwise, they would be required to have a garage, a covered garage, attached, detached, based on the context, the
Okay.
contextual garage placement.
So going to the sort of backup plan there, the way this is being proposed, then they would still have to have one uncovered space?
They would need no uncovered spaces. They would need no parking at all, effectively.
In terms of designing that, was that because we felt that people were going to run out of space for cars?
No, it's not that. It's more a procedural step, as Commissioner Rupavar was saying. There's 2 steps, right? You build it and then you convert it. If your intent from the beginning is to build an ADU, but you do not want to build a detached garage or an attached garage and an ADU and take up that space on your lot and the floor area from your lot, right? You have to go through those procedural hurdles.
I get all that. I'm just trying to figure out why in the proposal, staff has jumped to eliminating all parking on the lot. So I'm for the convenience. I get that part, but why couldn't we still say you have to have a required parking space, one?
I think you certainly could. It's as an incentive program, and this is where I think Mr. Yang can probably talk about this in terms of the legal aspect of it, right? You can certainly, with an incentive program, say that you can do that because it's not a requirement for you to go through that incentive program. If we were to say you're required to replace parking when you convert a garage to an ADU, or try to couch it in that type of argument, that would, I think, create a conflict with state law.
Yeah, I mean, so the scenario that I'm trying to get a read on, and maybe Mr. Yang can speak to this, is that the presumption here, which is being addressed, which I agree with, is we shouldn't force people to put stuff up and then rip it down. And if they want to do an ADU, we want them to do an ADU, and they can take the garage down. It's not clear to me why we also have to give up the fact that they have to have one car parked somewhere on the lot. So maybe Mr. Yang could address that legally.
Yeah, so we've already decided as a city that we're not going to require parking for an ADU. That is a part of our code right now. And the state has told us that when someone converts a garage, that they're not required to replace that parking space, or spaces, I guess, that are lost from that conversion.
Got all that, yep.
Yeah. So, I guess if I'm understanding your question correctly, you're asking, well, can we take back that space that we've said, okay, you don't have to park your ADU? Can we say, if you are removing spaces as a result of conversion, you do have to park your ADU?
No, I'm saying it basically the opposite. What I'm saying is, if a house right now has a requirement of one parked space and one unparked, so right now that's what a house has. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was one covered and one uncovered.
Yes, 2.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Okay, so it's 2 right now.
Correct.
And there's no ADU up. And let's say that and they convert that. I understand the laws mean that you don't have to replace any parking for the ADU, but so that takes care of one of the spots that's required. I don't understand why we automatically eliminate the second spot that was required before the ADU went up. And I was presuming that you were just trying to squeeze a car onto too small a square footage, but it doesn't sound like that's the issue. But I don't understand how that conflicts with state law, because we're saying you had 2, we're letting you convert the thing, and now you have none required.
In the example that I think you're trying to describe, are you imagining one covered space and one uncovered space?
No, one uncovered.
I think in the example, what you're trying to describe is we have a requirement now for one covered space and one uncovered space. And if you convert that covered space, what's happening with the one uncovered space that we
Right.
still say has to be beyond the front yard setback?
Right.
What I would say in that specific example that yes, we could still potentially require that uncovered space to be beyond the front yard setback. However, realistically on a plan, what you're going to see is just a long driveway to a certain point,
Mhm.
right? And will that meaningfully create more different kind of parking concept? Probably not, right? The only meaningful impact would be doing having a two-car garage example, right? Where you have two covered spaces and now you do an ADU and now you have no covered spaces whatsoever, right? Those two covered spaces were satisfying the city's requirement. And I think it is part of your suggestion also that, we're creating an incentive program and it's going to a different step than what the state law currently requires for conversion. Can we require, uncovered spaces as a result of those covered spaces being lost? Is that part of that question?
Yeah, but I still am coming at it from a whole different direction, which is we're giving them an incentive that they don't have to replace the parking for the ADU going up. But there's still sort of a built-in parking space that was required before that had to be below the beyond the 10-foot setback.
I understand what you're saying. To decouple it a little bit, we are required to, we are no longer allowed to require parking if it's converted. And I know you
For the
understand-
ADU.
For the ADU, yes.
Got that.
I think you understand that. For the home either, correct. As a result in that case, right? So I think the primary issue of,
Oh, no, that's the point I'm missing then.
okay, yeah, sorry. For the primary home, right now, garages serve, carports, covered, enclosed garages, that serves as our off-street parking requirements for the primary home. When someone converts that to a garage, to an ADU, that garage to an ADU, the house effectively has no covered parking anymore.
Okay.
No need for
in all
covered-
cases.
in all
I
cases,
did not
yes.
know that. Okay. Clarified it for me.
Okay, but if you currently have a single family house with a 1-car garage and one uncovered parking spot, and you convert that 1-car garage into an ADU, you do not have to replace that covered spot, but that uncovered spot still remains.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which, like I was saying before, if you imagine the uncovered space as being a driveway on the side of a home, it's effectively just some hardscaping leading up to, wider space on the side of the home, right? That's where a car would park. And on a plan set, we would say, here is your setback line, your front yard setback line. You have to show us an uncovered space over here because that's not part of the conversion. Only the garage being modified to an ADU is. That's, from a technical standpoint, something we could require. I think more realistically, is there a meaningful difference between those? And I think staff's argument at this point is there's not really a meaningful difference between those two if you still have your driveway in the front of the home that serves that same kind of purpose. For the uncovered parking example specifically.
So you have that, let me make sure that we're clear here. You have a 1-car garage and a driveway going up to that 1-car garage. That driveway has a 1 uncovered space.
Yes, tandem, if you think of it like that, tandem,
Yep,
right?
tandem.
Or it could be either, right? It could be tandem to it, right? Garage in front and then uncovered space on a plan set shown in front of it. Or as Commissioner Ekman was trying to suggest just now, side to side.
Side to side, but you have 1 uncovered spot somewhere.
But it can't, to be tandem, I think it can't be in the front setback.
Correct.
It has to be far enough into so if the front setback is, for example, 25 feet, then what you're talking about is your driveway is maybe 35 feet long and then goes into a 1-car garage. So then you got 1 car in the garage and 1 car that is 25 feet from the property line, if that's what the front setback is, to count. Otherwise, it's just driveway parking, which in building the home wouldn't count to satisfy your at least one covered, at least one uncovered parking requirement.
That's correct.
Okay, so it sounds to me like the way you answered the same question to Ed and Keith is totally different. And I'm on board with Keith.
Maybe
So-
we do need a whiteboard here next
Yeah,
time.
that's exactly right. But I guess the concern that I'm raising has nothing to do with the ADU at this point. It has to do with where cars are going to go. And it seems like if a driveway is generally a parking lot for cars, which it often is in our town, that's fine. But at the least, you should require that happen, sort of point one, meaning they can't take out the driveway and turn it into landscaping.
Yeah, we could and I'll say this, and Mr. Yang can speak more to it again from kind of a legal standpoint. I think that's something that I've certainly thought about as being a potential issue, right? That no longer, if someone goes through this process, that they would no longer or would not no longer be required effectively after the fact to build a driveway to access your parking, right? Which is, I think, what you're trying to get at.
That's what I'm trying to get at, because there's no reason if they want to just park on the street or something in front of somebody else's house, then they could take out their driveway and put in more landscaping. And then the parking problem goes to the neighbors, not necessarily to them. So what I'm trying to preserve here is a place to put one car on the lot. And the second thing I was going to say is that if it's the setback, I'd rather see us do something like, in the event that an ADU is put up, that for the one parking space, it doesn't have to be within 25 feet of the front of the yard, because you only need whatever it is, 8 feet for a car.
Yeah, 8.5 by 18. 9 feet.
You would know the extra 6 inches that I did.
9 feet if you're next to a wall or a fence. That's what we always tell people.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Yang, maybe you can speak to that. I know that you and I have talked slightly briefly, maybe some time ago, about that.
Just so I understand, the idea being discussed is to require that any uncovered parking on the site be provided for the single family home.
That one space be provided somewhere on the lot square footage. Uncovered. Did I say covered?
So I think we can require that when one space is existing, that it be retained. But there's the situation where someone builds a 2-car garage and then that is converted. We wouldn't have the ability to require, an uncovered spot to be created after that conversion.
Are you assuming no driveway in your example there?
No, I mean, if the garage is not at the rear of the property, the driveway might not be outside of the front setback.
Let's go to Commissioner Rupivar.
Thank you. Okay, so maybe this will help clarify or confuse things more, but it sounds like it's not a parking incentive program. Like, we're not giving like anyone any sort of concession in terms of parking for putting an affordable unit in place. It sounds like the law just doesn't allow us to require this additional parking. So if they put in, if both spaces are in a single garage and the person converts the garage to an ADU, then we're out of luck. There's no parking that we can require. And then separately, if it's just one covered parking that's converted, then that's fine. The uncovered one exists. But I think maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, staff, but it sounds like we're not giving any sort of parking incentive at all for building an affordable unit. We're not saying, oh, you don't need to put parking. I mean, I hear what Chair Lowing is saying, that is concerning, that there's going to be like now no parking, but it sounds like we're kind of stuck because of the law, unless there's a creative way without violating state law where we can ask for parking. Am I getting that right?
I think the creative way that Chair Lowing was suggesting would be to, as a part of this incentive, because it goes beyond what the state law currently requires, which is the state law, effectively the state law creates that two-step process as well. You build a garage or a garage exists and then you convert it. That's how you no longer have parking requirements for your main house. Right. So that's kind of the first example. That's what we're dealing with today. This scenario that we have in the draft ordinance is to say, you know, you don't even have to build a garage at all. If you're building a new home or, you know, whatever kind of iterations kind of come to it.
Right, the process issue. We're cutting out the process.
Right,
and
we're
getting
cutting
to
out
the
the process, and that to some extent is an incentive because of the lack thereof for the applicant to go through having multiple plans developed, going through the city review
Yeah, no,
processes, paying
that.
fees, getting inspections done, and then doing an entirely different structure and building it to something entirely different.
Yeah, I get that that's an incentive. It's a process incentive, but we're not saying they're not getting any sort of discount on having to have parking now.
They would be in that example, in that they would no longer need to put parking on the site.
But they wouldn't have to put it on the site if they went through the two-step process anyway.
That's correct. And we, in this incentive, would be trying to eliminate the two-step process.
Got it. Yeah. Okay, I don't know. It made it a bit more clear in my mind. I don't know if I confused things a bit more.
Commissioner Rectal?
Yeah, I mean, by getting around the two-step process, if you wanted to do it today, you'd have to provide parking. So we're giving them an incentive now to build the ADU and saying, you don't have to replace that garage in this one-step process, which is going to be more economical. I would have no problem if that one uncovered spot went into the setback. If
That's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, if that encourages ADU production, I think that's a good trade-off.
I mean, Council Yang come up with a kind of a corner case there, but I can't believe that's not fixable with some variance or another. Vice Chair Rupivar? I'm sorry. Vice Chair Suma, I had Rupivar on my mind after her last comments.
Thanks. So the city doesn't require parking for the ADUs. The state says when you renovate a garage, you don't need to replace that parking. So if it's a one-car garage, you don't have to replace one of the two required parking spots. If it's a two-car garage and that becomes an ADU, you don't have to provide both required parking spots.
Correct.
And what we are thinking about doing is not requiring any on-site parking for new builds, new single-family homes with ADUs, which I am not in favor of. I do not care if they're covered, but I think we should be still requiring the parking for the primary home. And of course, let them not have to apply for a garage, build it, and then also convert it. That nonsense should be removed. It makes no sense. But we have too many neighborhoods, you know, prior to our disastrous COVID, too many neighborhoods that had real serious problems with on-street parking not being adequate for the homes. And it's very inconvenient for certain people, especially disabled people, older people, women with small children, to not be able to find a place to get out of their car and into their home easily. So I think where we can't control it because of the state, then there's nothing we can do about that. But I think it's highly desirable to still require two on-site parking spots for new builds and eliminate the two-step nonsense. And I was going to ask about when you have a contextual garage placement that allows front garages, wouldn't the little short driveway, which is usually long enough to park one car in, that is in the front setback? It's just allowed in that condition. I just wanted to clarify that.
So if you do not have any garage on the property, existing, non-conforming for whatever reason, or you've converted your garage to an ADU, the city's municipal code automatically considers that to be a rear place garage.
Right.
And so if your context previously was front facing, majority front facing, 50% or greater, right? Front facing garages, and you're either at that trigger point of 50 or greater, or everyone along the block decides we want to do an ADU in our garage, that context changes now. So anyone who comes in who wants to build, a new home with a detached or attached garage, ADU, and also build a garage would be subject to a rear placement, contextual rear placement garage requirement. So there is the instance where that can have an impact on that, but as the city decided to update that ordinance more recently, it reemphasized the interest that they had, or the city reemphasized its interest in having a rear place garage over a front place garage.
Right, but I was just pointing out that in the case of front face garage, that you have a car's length leading up to it that is the second spot. So we can have a parking spot in some cases in the front. I would not, I don't think it matters where it would be contextually, since it's not a structure, but I do think we should be requiring, I don't think we want to eliminate on-site parking requirements because can be very problematic. But I am in favor of eliminating this two-step process. Let somebody apply for a primary home with an detached ADU and 2 on-site uncovered parking spots is my preference.
Other comments on this, Commissioner Heckman?
So I want to start big picture. I support this concept, and I support it for all ADUs, not just as a special incentive for affordable ADUs. One of the things I like most about this concept, and hasn't really been discussed yet, is if I've got a tear down, I'm going to build a new house, and I know I want an ADU. If I have to do the two-step process, then I'm going to have to build a conventional garage in a conventional location, and then I'm going to board it up, right? And so, in typical, I think most of the houses here in Palo Alto are front-loaded. You come in from the street, front of the house, and that's where your garage. Some of the garages are tucked around, but they're still facing the street. So with this policy, I think I don't have to put the ADU where the garage would be. I have more flexibility to make a better design that enhances the overall utility of the property. So that's an aspect I really like about this, is that once I have to build the garage, that's where the ADU is going. If I don't have to build it in advance, if I'm collapsing this process, I can put it wherever it works best. So that's the big picture. The thing we've been discussing a lot, I think there's a separate analysis for front-loaded garage and rear-loaded garage. And frankly, I was trying to think if I was in some jurisdictions, I've seen a lot of this where, you have these kind of alleyways and all of the garages are at the back of the property, usually right on the alley line, right? And you just turn in there, and that kind of layout, you don't actually have any on-site parking other than those 2 garages that, you drive in and close the door. There's not a driveway because those garages back up right to the alley. So if we have those here in Palo Alto, and again, I'm just not thinking of them, but we do. If I have one of those and I, under state law, convert that garage to an ADU, I don't have to replace those parking spaces. And that's just the state law. There's nothing we can do about it. I don't think we can, we can't. I know we can't say, okay, well, if you're going to do that, now you got to go to the front or you got to, break a hole in the fence and put an uncovered spot outside along the back or the front. We can't do that because the state says we can't. So I think in that scenario, which is in the minority of cases in Palo Alto, because it's not a prevalent layout, we're just stuck that way, and state law makes it so. But the other, I think more prevalent is where you have a street loaded garage. And as Vice Chair Suma was saying, all of those have a driveway before you get to the garage or carport or whatever it is, because that's been our requirement for forever, for a long time, and because you were never allowed to use that driveway as parking because it's in the front setback. So you always had to have something behind the front setback. So now, and I have that. That's what I have. I've got a 2-car garage and a driveway apron that's whatever, 20 feet, before it hits the sidewalk. So if I convert my garage to an ADU now, I'm losing the 2 parking spaces, at least one covered, one uncovered. In my case, they happen to be both covered. I'm losing those. I don't have to replace them. As a practical matter, though, I'm going to be parking my cars on the driveway. And while I appreciate the chair's concern about somebody, choosing with a new build just to landscape the front and have no driveway, I think that's more theoretical than practical. I know that when I come home with the groceries and my kids have filled the driveway with their cars, and I have to park on the street and carry the bags in, I'm irritated. I want the convenience of pulling into my driveway to unload, or if it's raining. And I think it would be the exception rather than the rule that somebody would say, I'm just going to have no driveway. I'm not going to have any parking for myself. I'm going to roll the dice every day that one of my neighbors isn't having a party and fills the street in front of my house, so I have to park down the street. So I just don't think that'll happen very much. So I'd be supportive of. I think to some extent we're stuck by state law and by our own ordinance, but I'm okay with that, and so I'd support this for all ADUs.
Commissioner Templeton?
Thank you. I do think that Commissioner Heckman covered most of the spirit of the comments I was planning to make, but I will add some more anecdata to the frustration at not having the use of your driveway. In my previous home, we had to resurface our driveway, and it became a lengthy project because we also adjusted the fence and put in a gate and things like that so that we could have use of we had a very long driveway. So for about a month, we did not have use of it. And I can tell you, it was a extreme frustration. And it's not something that I can imagine people would be doing flippantly. I think you'd really have to take into serious consideration whether that was sensible. And so I do have good faith in our neighbors here in Palo Alto. And I think that it's very unlikely that people would intentionally eliminate all spaces, although they might eliminate all covered spaces. In any case, I agree with Commissioner Heckman's suggestion of applying this to all the ADUs. Thanks.
Just one specific. I have a friend who has one of those alleyway situations, and the garage is an art studio in his case. But they also have a pull-in they can put cars. So they actually have 2 choices of what to do. So in his case, whether it's required or not, he would keep those 2 spots in back, or maybe it's only 1 back there actually, and then use the ADU. The other, as we've said, that's a very small inventory though of folks that are accessible off the alley. I think mostly Professorville, because of the age of those homes. So whatever we do there is not going to, even if they're exempt, it's not going to be affecting a lot of units. Yes.
I thought I'd
Steph.
add to that. Professorville is one area, but there's also community center, which is over near the community center. There's quite a few alleys in that area downtown as well. But I should also point out small lots. We have a number of, you say College Terrace, there's a small lot situation. So, what if somebody wants to build a single family residence and an ADU and there's not a lot of room for uncovered parking even in that situation?
Well, that was the basis of my original question, which is, were we concerned about the total square footage of the lot, not having room for the 10-foot car and the ADU and the home? But it didn't seem like that was the driver of the policy, so. Any other comments? Vice Chair Suma?
Okay, I guess I'm a little confused because I thought Commissioner Heckman was making an argument for needing a driveway, or what I would call an uncovered on-site parking. So I don't know why. I guess you think it's okay to eliminate the requirement because it won't happen frequently. Am I understanding that?
No, the state is eliminating the requirement. So I don't have any opinion on that. It's done.
No, that's not what I meant. In the case we're considering here is for new houses, two things: eliminating the two-step process, which I think we all agree on. And the second thing is not requiring 2 uncovered parking spots for the new build.
So
That's what I.
So when you, right now, I've got a house, it's got 2 covered spots. If I do an ADU, convert my garage to an ADU, I don't have to replace the parking. As a practical matter, I have a driveway in the setback that I'm going to use for parking, but it doesn't satisfy the city's parking requirements. I'm going to park there, but the city doesn't count that as on-site parking. Right? So, and that's the way it is. So what they're talking about now here is if I scrape my home, and right now under our law and state law, I'd have to basically build back a 2-car garage. So I have 2-car parking.
No, I understand that. We all agree that there shouldn't be a 2-step process.
No, but they're related. You can't, that's what I'm saying is you can't separate them, because when, that's the whole point of our discussion is when what happens when what we're talking about is if we're going to collapse the 2-step process into one, are we carrying the baggage of the 2-step process with it? Or are we saying, hey, we'll give you an opportunity to avoid the 2-step process, but there's a cost. And that cost is you don't get the benefit of the state law that says we can't apply the parking requirements associated with the conversion because you're not converting. So I guess maybe that's one way to frame the discussion, because
but you also
that's not
said
the intent here.
You also said everybody's going to just use their garage anyway. So
You mean the driveway?
the driveway, sorry. Yeah. There won't be any more garage. Yeah.
But I'm
as a matter of
suggesting it's
practice.
appropriate for a new build that wants an ADU to also supply 2 on-site parking spots.
Can they be in the setback? Can they be the driveway?
I don't care
spots?
where they are.
Okay.
They should be everybody parks in their driveway anyway.
Right.
And the reason is because households have more people living in them than they used to for many reasons, mostly the cost of housing here, boomerang kids, whatever. And everybody parks in their driveway. I'm saying that's appropriate and we should be able, and in the case of front place garages, they're parking in the setback when they park in their driveway. That was my point. I do not wish to eliminate that requirement and create more parking problems in our neighborhoods. I think it's very hard for elderly, disabled, and even you, when you're bringing your groceries home, to not know where that you can pull up. So that's why I would retain that requirement.
Are you calling Bart elderly?
I put him in a different category, someone who buys groceries.
Yes, I got that. So I think that it's an interesting idea. And again, I think when you talk about it that way, we are saying we'll give you this benefit of not having to build and convert, but there is a potential cost to it. My belief is most people, if the cost is I have to provide on-site parking that can be within the setback, in other words, the driveway before, I think most people will be doing that anyway. So I kind of like that idea, except it doesn't work on the rear loaded, then I think you end up with a situation possibly like the chair's friend who has a tuck-in next to the spot.
But that provides the same thing. And coming from Chicago, where with an alley service format, the garage is never the whole width of the property. There's always a pull in and a tuck in, and often there's space, garage, and tuck in, as you call it. Then there's a yard, then there's a house. So I think we will be creating a problem. And I agree that most reasonable homeowners would want to do that. We have a lot of unreasonable people who own property in Palo Alto as investment who may say, oh, I can save $4,000 by not having a parking spot on site for these people. I think it is substandard, actually, and in many cases dangerous and undesirable. So that's why I would still require it, and I think it can be anywhere it makes sense on the property. And if there is a property that's so small that it cannot accommodate the rule in general, we have a process called variance, and then we can look at that already exists. So I am totally not in favor of this for those reasons, except the first part, which is the stupidity of requiring them to build a garage that's going to turn into an ADU when they might not want the ADU in the space where the garage is required to be front, rear, or front. So those are my thoughts.
Commissioner Templeton?
Yes, this discussion started to make me feel pretty uncomfortable. I don't feel comfortable with characterizing Palo Altans and Palo Alto homeowners and property owners as somehow not understanding the needs of parking for their sites. It seems incredulous, and that's, I think, what the nature of some of these anecdotes was about, to say that I think it's pretty straightforward that most people understand that parking and parking accessibility is important. So that said, I think I want to focus back on what's the point of this discussion. The point is, how do we incentivize more ADUs? And I think, the idea that has been proposed is fine, right? Streamline the process, eliminate bureaucratic obstacles, but then adding in more things on top of that, especially if it somehow contradicts or is meant to work around other laws that are inconvenient, it starts to feel pretty uncomfortable. And I'm not sure how to get on board, because when I'm listening to us, I think we all mostly agree. So I just want to throw that out there as kind of a complication in the direction this discussion has taken. I would say I support policies that reduce bureaucracy, like this one that's been proposed, and I support policies that will encourage more ADUs, like this one that's being proposed. Thanks.
Okay, if there's no more comments on this one, we've completed 2 of the 4. And it's been 2 hours and 20 minutes. So I suggest we take about a 8-minute break, take us up to 8:30, and then come back to the next one, which is the impact fees. Right. Okay.
So like an 11-minute break, right, Chair?
Let's just go straight to, let's go to
8:30.
8:30. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Stand by. exempting units from impact fees and plan review fees. The title is, again, uses the word affordable, but we're going to discuss if these are applicable or suggest that these are applicable to all or just affordable. And the number that you reported out was, would you say that's the average or the median that was 65,000?
That's the upper limit.
Upper limit.
Yeah. So in our development impact fee spreadsheet on our webpage, it breaks down parks fees, general government fees, public services, all the development impact fees that we charge for any time a new unit is created. For ADU specifically, again, it's for any new unit that's created that's 750 square feet or larger, right? Where before it would have been any unit that was created. And that number now is around $67,000.
It goes as low as and as high as what? Is 67 is the
It
top?
goes as low as $0 and as high as $67,000 and every range in between.
Okay. So other questions for staff and or if not, then comments. Commissioner Recto?
You mentioned that the calculation involves both the size of the house and the size of the ADU. Can you go into that?
Yeah, so the way state law updated its ordinance to define or exempt certain certain accessory dwelling units from impact fees was to say that the way you factor or determine that amount is a proportional relationship between the house and the ADU. And how we understand that to mean is, what is the size comparison, right? And if, like in some of the examples I provided before, if you have an 800 or 1,000 square foot home and you propose an 800 or 1,000 square relationship is going to be 100%, right? A one-to-one relationship, right? They'll be both the same size. And in that instance, it's effectively being treated as equivalent to a brand new unit, right?
So then that would be
And-
67,000 for that.
Correct. In that example, it would be $67,000, right? For the development impact fees. For a unit that is half the size, or a quarter of the size, you would, do that factor calculation and determine, okay, well, it's not 67,000 anymore. It's 38,500, right? Or a quarter, right, of that $67,000. And that number, like I said before, ranges really just dependent on the size of the unit that someone's proposing and the size of their existing or proposed home.
And that's the maximum that the city could charge. Could the city decide to charge smaller?
We could potentially do that. Yes, it would require us to kind of rejigger how that ratio or some other number occurs. The importance would be that it does not result in a amount or whatever formula we created, right? Does not result in an amount that is greater than the proportional calculation.
Okay.
Is that
Are
all?
we asking questions right now or?
Yeah.
Or
See,
expressing opinions?
I think we can ask questions or now we can move to comments. I don't see any others from the screens. So go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I really, as a parks guy, parks aren't free, so we should charge for impact fees to build parks. But when we were setting this impact fee, I don't think we were considering an 800-foot ADU as having the same impact on parks as a huge 2-story house. So to me, it doesn't seem quite right that the ADU would be charged a maximum of 67,000. That seems excessive. The other issue is that if this ADU is behind a small house or behind a big house, it has the same impacts on parks. So it seems strange that we have this formula. I think just a smaller flat fee or maybe something proportional to the square footage of the ADU would be a better alternative.
Commissioner Heckman?
Saw my itchy finger.
I saw that finger go for that light.
All right, so this program, I think, should be our carrot for affordable ADUs. This program that we're talking about that staff has drafted. I think it's on the packet page 37 is the ordinance for the deed restricted affordable ADU program. I think this should be something that is available as the exchange to deed restrict your ADU for a duration that we'll discuss later. You're not going to have to pay any city fees because you're going to give us a different benefit than your money, which would go to parks and streets and whatever. The benefit you're going to give us is you're going to have a home for somebody of more limited means for X number of years. So I like it for that purpose. And I think that related to that, as was mentioned in the staff report, already our audience is only ADUs over 750 square feet anyway, because below that, you don't pay impact fees. It's not clear to me, you might have to pay the plan check fees and other development fees, which are not insubstantial. In fact, if you look at the architect's letter that was attached to the staff report this time and last time on page 55 of our staff packet, I think it's 55, they actually go through some of the math to look at the kinds of fees that are being charged on all ADUs. And they didn't even flag the large number Mr. Sauls gave us about the maximum impact fee. So we're not talking about ADUs less than 750. And I think we have something like 150 currently active ADU permits out there. And if that number is about right, what it's telling me is people are wanting ADUs outside of this program, and they're willing to pay the freight to get them. I'm sure if we cut the fees, that might more incentivize them. That's possible, but we're getting a good flow of them now, paying their proportionate share, which is the way that the ordinance is identified. And so that's why I'd like to try it just for these deed restricted affordables and see over a 2 or 3 year period if we can actually attract anybody to bite.
Seeing no current lights, I'm just going to make a couple comments. I think that we, in general, want to encourage more ADUs. That's the whole goal of all this time we've been spending on it for months. And I think that when it gets as high as 67,000, that really does start to be a barrier. And as Keith pointed out, some of these things are maybe not quite tallying up for what it costs for that extra person to come to a park. That said, there are hundreds of ADUs that are going to be maybe thousands in the next 10 years that come out of this, which is a good thing. And that's thousands of people. So moving ADU fees down to zero at any range is going to be an expensive proposition that I'm not sure how we backfill for that, because they're incremental costs. They really are. That's why they're there at all. This is not extra revenue that we get as the city. I said, oh, we found a new revenue stream. This is more cost for more people in all the services and police and so on. So I don't think we have enough data tonight on the non-BMR units to come up with some number. But I think I would address this by saying, let's encourage staff to come up with some new fee schedule that would look at whatever you want, size of fee relative to the size of the unit. And I'm also amenable, I was going to suggest that Keith just did, I'm also amenable to a flat fee so that everybody knows, because it's over 750, but it's not going to be 17,000. So it's roughly the same size. And I think we could come up with maybe a flat fee. But I don't want to get out another whiteboard and start trying to figure out what the fees are, and so I would basically say, I think we should look at some reduction in ADU fees overall. And we don't have the data to talk about that. The next thing we're going to talk about is the BMR, and we can readdress your points, I think, on the BMR. But what I'm saying is, in addition to that, or instead of that, maybe I'd be willing to, in fact, I would encourage us to take a look at a new fee schedule just to see what might work that's more palatable to more people and get more built that way. Nobody on screen. Vice Chair Suma?
Sure, thank you. So I do think the proportional thing is kind of results in the extreme case of 67,000, kind of ridiculous outcome. So I would agree that maybe those impact fees need to be looked at. And I think as far as the development center fees, unless it's changed, the development center fees we're there to pay for the services required to process the applications. And I believe the development center is revenue neutral. In other words, it's not making money for the city's general fund. It's making money so it can keep operating. So I don't see how those can be removed in any situation. And I know that also because I was on this development center customer advisory group for years. It was like 8 years that this group existed to help sort of figure out some new direction for the development center. Cutting fees of all kinds, impact fees, will cut services in the city. And what's not clear to me is that it's not the, in the case of BMR ADUs, it's not the BMR tenant that pays the fees, it's the homeowner that is building the deed restricted BMR. So I would not, I think I'm open to agreeing that we need to change some of these fees, and we don't have the information to look at that in detail and make a recommendation tonight. But I think there are cases and there are programs in the state, and I think the county, to assist people with loans, lower income people, to help them build ADUs. And I think the point of that has nothing to do with BMR ADUs. It has to do with helping lower income people, and at the same time, because it'd be a revenue source for them, at the same time providing a new dwelling unit. Okay, so I think in that case, people who qualify for those other kinds of assistance through other programs, we're not offering them, but I have read about them, then it would be appropriate to consider waiving fees in situations like that. Before, I don't see why for everybody. And I think it was Commissioner Chang that really brought up, she would be happy to waive all the fees, but she felt that then there should be a plan of how to replace that money in another way, and that the council might consider that. So those are my initial thoughts in general.
Okay, I don't see any more comments on this one.
For the purpose of discussion, I'll maybe play devil's advocate to contradict your opinion or your position that you were commenting on about proportionality. So as it relates to people living in the space, right? You don't have half a person, you don't have a third of a person, you have a whole person or multiple, right? Previously, before the proportionality aspect, I think if I remember correctly, had about like a 0.6 ratio for ADUs, and those were pretty flat rates between, I think, 7 to 12, sometimes $14,000, right? I think, again, just trying to play this devil's advocate to try to maybe spur a part of this conversation and maybe think about some of these things too. The kind of comparison almost that the state is making is, what is the size of the unit compared to like a regular home, right? And what is the proportion of that impact from that unit versus, thinking of it as, okay, we'll set a flat fee on everything, right? No one has to pay more than X number amount. To some extent, someone might argue that's almost a fairer comparison because you have a relationship that is tied instead to the size of the unit and the impact it can create versus saying that there's maybe a flat, percentage or a flat ratio, right, or flat fee to assume that something is or is less impactful because it is a different kind of unit. So when you have a unit that is a one-to-one relationship, right, the example 800 to 1,000 square foot unit, right, that's the same size of your home. What is the difference, right, between the impacts from a home that's 1,000 square feet and the impacts from an ADU that's 1,000 square feet? The difference really is only the nomenclature rather than the actual impact. Like I said, just maybe part of this conversation. I don't know if that has, any effect on thoughts or anything like that.
Yeah, my proposal was just simply that we should look at some other ways of doing the fee based on what's being charged now for what size of unit. But I think that the impact fees are driven primarily by the people, not the size of the unit. And, an ADU is not going to have 8 people in it. So that's why I was thinking it might be simpler to do it non-proportionally. I'm totally open to proportion, but you might want to change the proportion, so they're only paying, $20,000 instead of $60,000. So I'm interested in seeing if there's a reasonable way to get the costs down, but still, cover your costs for, processing this and getting real impact fees. But I also yield to my ex-colleague on parks and my current colleague here that, maybe the parks fees weren't thinking about this in the proportional way that you're proposing. So that's my only point on this right now, is that I think we can't just, we can't make any decisions without data, and we have only one data point in front of us is from 0 to 67,000. So I think any adjustment downward at this point, we can't make, but I'm willing to consider what that should be. Because I know that, the people have said in public comment that it costs a lot just to pay you guys to put it up. And we do want units. So that was my only point. Commissioner Heckman?
Yeah, to sort of react to the concept of reducing impact fees for ADUs generally, not focused on an incentive for BMRs, for deed restricted. I like the idea. I like the idea because I think that our BMR ADU program is not going to have many takers. And I think it actually becomes more true. The more we reduce the impact fees to all ADUs, the less incentive there is, the less I save by making mine deed restriction. So that will, in fact, depending upon where we go with that, I don't even think it's worth maybe pursuing a BMR ADU program. But if we can, by reducing impact fees specifically for ADUs, generate more ADU development, I think that's good. I think we'll gain more ADUs that way than we're going to lose on the BMR program that, again, I think is going to be poorly subscribed. But when we're looking at those impact fees, and I think when staff comes back, if maybe we could have some of the example math laid out, I think it would help us. That 67,000 figure is startling, but we're really hearing it rather than seeing it. Because I think what that is if my main house is 800 square feet, which is rare, and I'm building an 800 square foot ADU, that's when I think I hit that max impact fee, because my ADU is the equivalent of my main house. So I think if we could have some examples to show us how that proportionality works in what do you bring back, I think that would be helpful.
I totally agree with that. And that's exactly what I'm saying, is we basically have zero data that we can process and think about and figure it out. And so we almost have to, I think, kind of table this issue at this point.
Yeah, I think we need to sort of get out on the table all of the things that we want staff to cogitate on and bring back to us. And then it doesn't seem like we're ready to make any decision tonight or any kind of motion. I agree.
Yeah, but I'm not even sure you can get that ready in like 4 weeks if that's when you come to us with the ordinance, because you got some data crunching to do there.
If it comes to spreadsheet numbers, I mean, that's something I could even show today, but it's a matter of just, I think what Commissioner Heckman was saying, writing out the formula, expressing it in a more visually, dynamic way.
Yeah, we want to see statistically where they all lie, and are they all small units or is it just proportional? So it's a data analysis, right? Okay. So there's no other comments on this. Then let's go to the fourth one. And first, just as a matter of history, I want to go back there, which back to this BMR issue, because we spent quite a lot of hours back in the Zoom only days. I remember that meeting, trying to figure out if there was a way to make affordable housing units, make ADUs into BMR ADUs, which would make affordable housing more affordable. And I feel like we hit a wall. That was sort of the conclusion that I recall is that they're already inherently affordable and we're new at this. So go with the plan here and see how things continue to develop. And the second thing, which was harder, was getting any sort of agreement on length of time that something would remain a BMR before it reverted to not BMR, which would mean that those units would be lost X years from now. So in terms of framing the discussion, I would ask the question of what more are we going to gain by re-looking at this from last time versus just saying it's too early to move on BMR ADUs.
Well, I would say we do have a concrete proposal from staff on packet page 37. And we didn't before, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So on the screen here shows the items that the PTC previously did not agree on, which are shown as these asterisks, and these plus marks, which are the items that PCC did recommend in that discussion when we had that. So the items for duration of affordability, there was no consensus on. The time period, staff had suggested 15 years. PTC, some members of the PTC said 10 years, some said 20, some said 30. So that was where there was no consensus on that duration, nor a consensus on duration of potentially providing a shorter period for a deeper level of affordability. What there was consensus on was trying to target the 80 to 120% area median income thresholds, where the low income 50 to 80% are primarily addressed through larger affordable housing projects and multifamily projects that incorporate those components to them. There was consensus on Alta Housing being the administrator, that they would also be the one who is income certifying potential tenants, or that homeowners may be able to select. And then separately from that, when it comes to tenant selection, that homeowners would have the option to present a prospective tenant to Alta Housing to have them vetted rather than choosing from a pre-established list, which would have been Alta's preference. That would be easier for them to administer. There wasn't consensus on Alta, homeowners being responsible for doing the $700 yearly, the initial income certification, which at the time cost around $700, and then a $500 annual recertification. And some of the other items that PTC had consensus on was potentially using state funds to either create loan program or work with loan organizations to find ways to finance some of these things.
Open for discussion. Commissioner Heckman, your light's on.
It's a carryover actually from last time. I do have some things to say, but if somebody else wants to lead off, that's fine.
No, go ahead.
Okay, well, I really think this whole concept is DOA, unfortunately. But I think that staff can, when they come back, help us with some numbers to kind of prove the point. And the reason I think it's DOA is I think when staff comes back with the numbers, what we're going to see is this just can't pencil out for a homeowner who's willing to consider it. And so, for example, this outrageous version of the impact fee is $67,000, right? If you look at Mr. Randy Pop's letter, he's talking about maybe another $10,000 in city fees and school fees. So that's $77,000. So if I say to a developer somebody's going to build a home, I'm going to save you $77,000. You don't have to pay for it. You don't have to pay any of that money. But you have to be deed restricted for, and I'm just going to say 10 years, which we could not get a majority of the commission to agree to last time. 10 years, you have to take less rent, right, by deed restriction. So if that less rent is, just call it $700 a month, that's going to be $8,400 a year, or $84,000 over just the 10 years. So I'm going to save $77,000 up front, but it's going to cost me $84,000 over just 10 years. And of course, if I expand that out to 15 years, now it's going to cost me $126,000, I think, for 15 years, right? And so the numbers are just not going to work out. So, but that's just off the top of my head, and I think we could have some more accurate numbers if staff would look at this when they come back and look at the kind of, you're showing item B here, where we've got kind of different levels of affordability, and what would that mean in terms of a rent reduction if we were going to have somebody agree to, deed restrict at 50 to 80% of AMI, right? What kind of rent on a, whatever, a 2-bedroom, 1-bath ADU would we expect, and then carry that compared to market, and then carry that out over, a year and 10 years. Because again, I think what this is going to show is that the numbers are just not going to add up. Nobody's going to do it. And if that's what the numbers show, then we shouldn't be wasting effort on this BMR version of ADU, and we should continue to focus on our efforts on the generic ADU and how to encourage that by possibly reducing impact fees or some kind of better scaling.
Just a point of clarification, your suggestion of 700, that's what you're saying there is it's 700 less than the market rate you might get for it. Is that what you're saying? That's the lost?
Yeah, that was the hypothetical is without the deed restriction, if I could rent this unit for 2,500, but because it's deed restriction, I can only rent it for 1,800. That's costing me 700 a month, just hypothetically.
Vice Chair Suma.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, I kind of worry that this isn't a very practical idea anyway. And I also, so the AMI is a county figure, countywide, and Palo Alto is significantly more expensive to live in than the median county price. And so I think it'd be hard to calculate what the market rate is even, and what the reduction that's realistic also. And I would never be comfortable with the 80 to 120% AMI, because I think then you're giving potential, well, as Commissioner Heckman points out, it might end up costing money anyway. So it wouldn't be saving money for the landlord. And I think at that income level, I don't think I understand what you're saying about most people that are at the 30 to 60 AMI being in larger buildings that are developed and operated just for that purpose. But I also think I just at 120, and BMRs ADUs we already think are going to be naturally more affordable. I don't see where this is going to really produce housing that's very different at all from market rate potentially, especially when we're looking at the county numbers, and Palo Alto's numbers are much higher. much more expensive. So I wish we could make this work, but it just doesn't sound practical. And I think those are my thoughts. I kind of agree with Commissioner Heckman on this, and I worry that it's not practical and that it's not really going to provide much of a cost reduction to the tenant.
Commissioner Rectal?
Me too.
Other commissioners? We can't see the screen now, so,
Oh, we can't see this.
Nothing from me. Thank you, Chair.
okay.
Yeah.
The slide's up, so we can't see our online commissioners.
Same.
Commissioner Heckman, any more comments?
No, nope.
Okay.
I think that as long as, staff has, again, I think this is a really important discussion we've just had on these last two items. And I just want to make sure that staff has, fairly clear idea of the kind of information we'd like to see when it comes back, whenever this comes back in September, I suppose.
Okay, so then I think we would go back. Did you have a comment? Then I think we want to go back to the top of the four and see if we can have votes on each of the four. Simpler way to do it, split them up. Is that okay? Any comments on that?
So are we going to vote for all of the bullet points for all ADUs and for BMR ADUs, or just for all ADUs?
No, I'm seeing, okay, that's a good question. It's 4 bullet points, but we're not going to cast the first 3 in the context of BMR.
Okay.
So this would be, so for the first 3, we're going to say, are we going to apply this to all ADUs and or just BMR ADUs, which we decided in the 4th point that we're not going to move forward with.
Okay, so we're still in item D on our staff report, right? You're talking
Yes.
about those 4.
Yes.
Okay.
So you're gonna take item 1. So item 1, you're going to vote for if it applies to all ADUs as opposed to take 2 separate votes, all or BMR. So is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
that's what I think is better because
Yeah. Okay. So get through
somebody
that
could
one.
propose it either way as the motion is made. So the first one, did you want to just recap this in like 2 sentences so we, for the record, if people are reading these minutes, they'll know what we're voting on?
So item 1 is the extension of non-complying walls.
Yeah, so the first item would be allowing a reconstruction or expansion of a non-conforming structure.
Okay, so can we have a motion on that? Okay, I'll move it then, and then, oh, sorry. I just can't follow 2 sides of lights and 2 people on screen. Go ahead, Vice Chair.
Oh, okay. I will move the staff's proposal on item I for all ADUs.
Second.
Rectal and Suma? Any further discussion?
Just a clarification. I think the way the staff presented this to us, the motion makes it sound like they were recommending that this concept be applicable to all ADUs. And I think that staff was neutral on that. In fact, it's under the heading incentives for an affordable ADU. And so they were asking us. So I think that the motion is just, that we like this idea and it should be applicable to all ADUs, and kind of leave out the staff recommendation part.
Yeah, that's
Well-
partly at the end of each of those sections where it identifies,
Right.
that PTC previously recommended this could be done for all ADUs, and that we need that direction.
Yeah, exactly.
But staff did talk about 12 inches and 12 feet and all those were specific numbers.
Yeah, I think the numbers would stay the same. It's a matter of what it's applying to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're all on the same page. Yep.
Yeah, we are.
I agree.
Okay. No other comments? Then let's vote on that. Take a roll call, please.
Commissioner Hackman,
Yes.
Chair Lowing,
Yes.
Commissioner Regdal,
Yes.
Commissioner Rupervar,
Yes.
Vice Chair Suma,
Yes.
Commissioner Templeton.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And now we're going to move to double I, packet page 20. Sorry? Yeah, it's headed as removing the existing garage carport requirement. So somebody like to make a motion on that?
Okay.
I'll do it. So, I'm going to frame this in the PTC is making a motion on staff's idea of removing the existing garage carport requirement for conversions to all ADUs. That's all part of it.
I don't think so.
No, part of this, this policy only says, or as written, this policy only says, if you eliminate the one-step process, you no longer need parking whatsoever.
Yeah, so
For
you,
new builds.
Eliminate the two-step process, which in effect means and
Okay,
creates.
let me withdraw that. That doesn't capture it. So you vote on eliminating the two-step process for all ADUs?
yes, and you want, from your prior comments, you want to add that there be a remaining required parking of whatever it is, 1 or 2 spaces, whatever.
Okay, let me restate this. With regards to staff recommendations on removing existing garage carport requirements for conversions, move that the two-step process be removed, but that for new applications, for new builds, that 2 on-site parking spots, regardless of covered or uncovered, well, 2 uncovered parking spots shall still be required
On the lot.
on the parcel. It's kind of clunky.
Okay, any second to that?
I'll second that. I'll have a friendly amendment of allowing it to be on the setback.
I think you mean the front setback, or do you
Well-
mean front or rear, or both?
Well, conceivably, if you had an alley, it would be in the rear setback, but
Okay. So I'll accept that if we specify that it's front or rear setback.
okay.
To the maker, I have a suggestion. You said uncovered, do you mean covered or uncovered?
That's fine. I don't think there should be a requirement for covered.
My concern was the wording may imply the requirement is uncovered. So I just wanted to double check that. Thank you.
I can change that if people would prefer it. I don't care if somebody builds.
Well, you said one or the other, so that probably covers it. Huh,
I
it
would
covers it.
probably just focus on uncovered instead of having covered spaces. If we were to say it could be anywhere, you can now have a garage right at your front property line, which is not something that is
No.
copacetic, and at least in Palo Alto right now, right?
Yeah, I think that's better.
Right.
Okay.
So, and to clarify, Commissioner, Vice Chair Suma, sorry. Your recommendation is to allow this policy be available to all ADUs, not just affordable ADUs. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's one part of it, right? That's the first part. Is that your recommendation is to allow this for all ADUs?
When there's a new bill, allow, yes.
Okay, so
Sorry, for new buildings, new applications for single-family homes that want to have an ADU, remove the two-step process, so they don't have to build a garage and then change it into an ADU, but to retain a requirement for 2 on-site parking spots.
Comments from commissioners? Commissioner
Is that
Heckman?
clear?
So I think we have to be careful with this motion that it be phrased in a way that doesn't potentially conflict with the state law that says, you know, when you convert, you don't have to replace parking. And so I think it's easy to do that. But I think the concept is, and we've seen it in other, some of the other areas, this is really an option that the city, you can build, with a new build, you can build a garage and then tear it out and get your ADU. Alternatively, we'll give you the option of skipping the two-step process, provided you're willing to provide 2 uncovered spaces on site, including in the front or rear setback. So I think when we, and maybe Mr. Yang will chime in on this, but I think we want to state it in a way that makes clear that if somebody wants to do what the state law says, fine, you can build a garage and then tear it out and build the ADU. If they don't want to provide on-site uncovered parking, because we can't stop them from doing that.
No, we can't stop them. Sorry. For conversions, the state prohibits us from replacing the parking. But for new builds, which is specifically addresses, we are saying, let's take this two-step process out, but require on-site parking, which the state has not opined or prohibited.
Okay, I still see it as an alternative to what the state says is you have to allow the conversion, and when you allow it, you can't require replacement parking. That's a law. And
Yes.
so what we're not, so what we're, again, what this motion would do is give people an alternate path, but there's a cost to it. That's all I'm saying.
When they're rebuilding.
They don't have, no, with a brand new building, right? I've got a vacant lot. I got 2 choices. If I don't want to put any parking on my site, then right, I'm going to do the 2-step. I'm going to build, you know, it probably have to be a rear loaded, right? Because or else I'm going to have a front driveway because of the front setback. So on a rear loaded, I could build my new house with my 2-car garage facing the alley. Then as soon as I get the certificate of occupancy, I'm going to apply to convert that 2-car garage into an ADU, and I don't have any housing. I don't have any parking on site, right? I can do that. Or alternatively, I can save the money of not having to build something and reconfigure it if I'm willing to provide 2 on-site uncovered spots that can be in the front or rear setback. So that's why I think this is an alternative to the what's allowed under state law.
Okay.
And I would support it in that form, because I don't want us to write an ordinance that HCD says you're in conflict with state law.
Yeah, so my thought on this is, as you said, Commissioner Heckman, I think people are going to want to keep their driveways and park there. So as long as we released that problem by letting them park in the setback, I don't think this is going to have any material effect at all on the owner of the house. So I don't think it's onerous to them, and it does provide some protection that there's not spillover into the neighborhood, and it doesn't turn into a large landscaping project. which I also think would be a very small number of cases. So I'm comfortable with this.
Yeah, if staff feels we need to add that this is a alternative to the state law, that seems like a clunky thing to put in a motion.
Yeah, it just is. It is that. So
I think staff understands
Yes.
the proposal, and we will figure out a way to
Okay.
phrase it.
Commissioner Rupavar?
I was just gonna say I'm supportive of the motion as long as like the phrasing is as Commissioner Heckman recommended, just to make sure we're not in violation of state law. It's just a matter of semantics. It seems like staff has it. Thank you.
Council Yang is going to protect us from that. I'm not worried. If there's no other comments, we can move to a roll call on this one.
Commissioner Heckman,
Yes.
Chair Lawing,
Yes.
Commissioner Regdal,
Yes.
Commissioner Ruparvar,
Yes.
Vice Chair Suma,
Yes.
Commissioner Templeton.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, thank you. So for the next one on units from impact fees and plan review fees, and this is strictly on non-BMR based on our last conversation on item number 4. So do you need anything other than direction from us that we would like to see some stats?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Commissioner Rectal?
I also be interested in seeing what percentage of the ADUs are above 750. If I'm putting an ADU up today and I have to pay 67,000, I'm stopping at 749.
Yeah.
And if we want a variety of ADU sizes, cutting the fees may be beneficial. So it'd be interesting to see what the current status is.
Yeah, that's something I've also asked our data team to help me figure out, because our quarterly ADU reports identify how much impact fees we take in every year. And you can clearly see precipitous fall from 2017 to 2020 in terms of the amount of impact fees that we're taking in. And I haven't looked at it yet recently. I wouldn't be surprised to see a commensurate increase in the average size of units, like you're suggesting, right?
Mhm.
That there's that threshold point that everyone now is clear and understanding of. I can go up to here and I have no problem. I go just a little bit more. Now I have a lot of money I have to spend, or maybe not a lot, but
Yeah.
could be a fair amount of money to spend, right? So previously, if I remember correctly, before 2020, our average unit size was about between 300 and 400 square feet. I wouldn't be surprised to see that average is probably doubled. But we should have had the Q1 and Q2 reports to council within the last couple of months. So I can certainly take a look back at that and incorporate that into part of that discussion the next time.
I mean, there's other advantages for staying under 750, not just fees, right? So that people will do the ministerial project, so they have other perks that come with that.
Yeah.
So.
I also just wanted to mention, and I know this may not be possible, but it would be so valuable to know how many of these ADUs are being providing housing for another family or individual, as opposed to just being used for extra space, guest house, office for the family. And I know that's hard, but it would be so valuable to know that.
There was I wish I could remember off the top of my head the agency that did this. I believe it was a statewide survey that was done within California to understand that specific question. And from my recollection, there was less than 600 responses for the entirety of the state. So hard to say that that's entirely representative of the population of everyone who's built an ADU in the state. However, that relationship, if I remember correctly, came out to about like a 30-30-10. Sorry, 30-30-30-10, which was like rental income, elderly care or family care unit, right? Where there's no charge, right, to rent, or there's no income received, right? I wish I can remember the other two now. Of course, the most important one is that it was about like a third almost of what that response came back with. One of the things we internally have been discussing about is trying to find a way to capture some of this data so we have Palo Alto specific information one, in general, I think there's a sentiment that these units are naturally affordable, which we cannot prove. Primarily because there is no data to demonstrate it. And what data we have found is inconclusive, which spans between, and by data, I mean what I can find online, researching websites, Craigslist, apartments.com, Zillow, whichever you want to find, whichever platform you want to describe, right? It is wildly varied between $1,800 and $4,000 for a unit, which is also wildly varied between 200 square feet and 900 square feet. And those two numbers are not related to each other. I've seen ones charged more for smaller units than larger ones and vice versa. So the lack of that information is hard to really put a concrete number to, and it's certainly frustrating. We've certainly had internal discussions about trying to create a prompt and how we can integrate that, preferably into maybe a permit application, so that when an applicant submits something to us, we can just ask them 3 or 4 or 5 questions. What's your intention behind this? We're not going to capture their personal information, but just get a survey of it, right? To start pulling that data, in which case, if we determine at the end of it that these do, or the anticipation is that these units will be rented for whatever qualifies as, 50 to 80% or 80 to 120% AMI, can we present that data to HCD and say, these units here, this number, this proportion of the units we proposed and have built should count towards our affordable RENA goals, right? So there's a relationship there that can be valuable, but we haven't developed that yet. And I think there's still some hesitation to really go that far, to either make it a mandatory, response from the applicant versus, a suggested one, in which case you may really not get responses at all.
Sure, and you don't want to make people feel like they're doing something wrong because they're building it for their own family use, because that's not the case. So it's really tough. It's kind of frustrating.
Okay, so should we just give you sorry.
I had a question. I had some comments,
Go ahead.
Chair.
Good.
Thanks,
ahead.
Vice Chair Suma. So I think what you're thinking about for staff is the UC Berkeley Turner Center for Housing put a number of, do I got it? Yeah.
That's
They put
correct.
a number of, they have some great surveys out that they did statewide. And then there are a number of accelerator programs in place too that could give you data on affordable housing incentives and programs other counties and jurisdictions have run. And I'm happy to share that content with you. And then also I was going to say it's a nice to have, but it'd be interesting to see what other jurisdictions have done with respect to their affordable programs for ADUs. So maybe we can get some ideas if you guys have time, something to look at.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Templeton?
Thank you. I just wanted to elevate something that Commissioner Suma said right at the very end, that it's should be embraced and okay for us as a city to accept and understand that having family members and extended family is, not only culturally appropriate, but welcomed in our community. So I think, it is important to understand it, but it does still serve as a place for someone to live that they wouldn't have if the structure hadn't been built. So just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page about that. Thanks.
So staff, would you just like a general motion that we'd like to see data distribution on?
Yeah, I think that's
impact
helpful if
fees?
you can
Yeah,
make it more
so
clear.
I would move that we just present to us some data distribution on impact fees across, size of units and any other relevant material, so we can evaluate whether or not to look at reducing development fees, and if so, in what way.
Do we really need a motion for that? I mean, it feels like we've got.
I don't think we do. I think it's just for clarity.
Oh, I thought you just said you wanted one.
Sorry, I apologize that I communicated that. I mostly just wanted that to be more clear, what the approach you wanted us to go
Okay.
with.
Okay.
So we don't think we need a motion for that. It's
Okay.
just that
Fine.
knowledge.
It's kind of like a straw poll in that sense.
Yeah, I think everyone's. Yeah. I don't see anybody objecting to more data. This commission usually asks for more data, so that's very consistent.
And this would not be part of the ordinance anyways.
Right, right. Okay, and then on the last one, I think there was also pretty much consensus that at this point, that dog's not going to hunt. So do you want a recommendation that we do not think that council should proceed with BMR ADUs? Wouldn't hurt, right?
Yes, it would not hurt to have just a clear direction as to whether or not we really want to engage in this program, because as you can imagine, time saved is time spent better on something else.
Right, right. So it seemed like that's kind of where we're ending up, that at this point in time, seems like Commissioner Heckman has a comment.
Yeah, so I'm not ready to be there yet. For the same reason we need data before we make a decision on what to do with impact fees. I have suggested that we need some data on this last item.
Okay.
To help us understand, what the a theory, a schedule of possible rent differentials over a period of years. So that my speculation is that this is going to prove to be financially infeasible. But I don't want to make a vote and tell us we shouldn't do it based on my speculation. I'd like to see some data. So
That's
I
fine.
prefer that this be deferred until staff comes back with like item 3. Come back with the data and then we can make an informed decision.
Is that enough direction, Garrett? Okay, great. Any minority views on that? Looking at screens and people and,
Well,
go ahead.
I'm pessimistic. Data is good. I would just tell staff not to waste a lot of time. Collect the data, but don't do a lot of processing on it. I think we're trying to get the biggest bang for the buck. It'd be nice if it works out, but
Yeah, and based on what Mr. Sauls just said about trying to find out how much people are renting ADUs for, and sometimes smaller ones are more expensive, and it will be hard, but I don't want to give up on this idea yet either completely.
Yeah, it is. There's no need to make a recommendation on any of that. We are intending I am intending to do something about that. Again, preferably just a short survey, which we'll either be able to send out to the addresses we received applications for, and preferably get an answer about that. And then going forward, ideally have it be something that future applicants just, like their application form, will just fill out and give to us to
Yeah.
start tabulating that data, right?
Okay, fine. Anything else on this item that you need feedback on tonight?
I guess the noise producing is still a bit left at the moment. It sounds like there's not
More
entire
data.
consensus. Okay.
More data, right? We're gonna get those 2 items, which is the kind of was it a fire assessment and
We'll ask the
And
fire
noise.
department their thoughts on, if that creates a conflict with them. I don't think that there will be, but we'll confirm with them.
Yep.
Then the separate aspect of that also is to see if we can find some resource to help us understand that distance relationship and how noise attenuates over a
Yeah.
greater distance.
Exactly
which
right.
We're going to consult, bring on a contract with Commissioner Rectal to, do that work for us. Yeah, not him, his physics book,
I'll
actually.
give you my physics book. Yeah.
okay,
Are we ready for a motion to continue this item?
Yep.
Okay. So I move that we continue this item to review and discuss potential ordinance changes to our municipal code regarding ADU and JDUs and I'd like to make the motion to move it to September 14th. I understand we've got an impacted calendar on August 31st. I think we want a date certain that, number one, gives staff enough time to gather data, but also gives the public, a firm date that they can count on to hear us wrap this up.
I would yield the staff on that to know what's not only what else is coming, but what
Well-
they have stacked up.
I mean, if you continue it to that date and we're not ready, we'll just continue it again. I mean, but it's certainly nice to shoot for something.
Okay, So that's the motion. Is there a second?
Second,
If there's no other comments, can we make a roll call vote for the continuance?
Commissioner Heckman,
Yes.
Chair Lowing,
Yes.
Commissioner Regdal,
Yes.
Commissioner Ruparvar,
Yes.
Vice Chair Suma,
yes.
Commissioner Templeton.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, thank you. These are always complex issues, so we made good progress. So the next item is four has been postponed. So the next item is minutes of June 8, draft verbatim and summary.
I will move approval of the June 8th draft verbatim and summary meeting minutes as revised.
Second, please.
Second,
Vice Chair Suma seconds. Any other comments? Roll call, please.
Commissioner Heckman,
Yes.
Chair Lowing,
Yes.
Commissioner Regdal,
Yes.
Commissioner Ruparvar,
Yes.
Vice Chair Suma,
yes.
Commissioner Templeton.
Which date is this for? I'm just trying to
June
make-
8th.
Was I here June 8th? Make sure I'm not voting on one when I wasn't here. Just give me a second. I can't find it in our booklet.
You were here.
That was the day I was here. Okay.
You were here.
Then for June 8th. Yes, thank you.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, now we move to
Thank
June.
you, Chair.
Yeah, I'm reading it. I didn't remember.
It's
it. I'm
late.
reading it.
I'm so tired.
June 29th. And Vice Chair Suma was not present for that.
Move approval of the draft verbatim meeting minutes of June 29th as revised.
I'll second. Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Heckman,
Yes.
Chair Lowing,
Yes.
Commissioner Regdal,
Yes.
Commissioner Ruparvar,
Yes.
Vice Chair Suma,
Abstain due to absence.
Commissioner Templeton.
Yes.
Motion carries 501.
I'm sorry. I was mixing it up with July before. So thank
Yeah.
you for helping me out there.
Yeah. Okay, I don't think there are any committee items because the only committee I know about is the ad hoc on ADUs. So any comments, announcements, questions?
Chair,
Yes, go ahead, please.
thank you. I have a planned absence on 8/31. I just wanted to let the commission know that. Thank you.
And we have the upcoming agenda items as much as we know it right now. So we talked about that up front. So I don't think we have to address that. Okay, I think that wraps it up. So thank you all, and we stand adjourned.
Thank you. Good night.